Good evening all and welcome. I'd like to just thank everyone for subscribing and pressing the bell icon and keeping those notifications on. It genuinely feels like YouTube is trying to turn it off for a bunch of people, so for everyone who has returned and keeps watching, thank you. It really means the world to me. So for tonight's compilation, this particular vintage of stories is from about 1.5 to 2 years ago, so I really hope you enjoy the mix. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My family house is over 100 years old, on an apple orchard estate. The house was abandoned and renovated in the 70s by a couple. They grew older and the wife was told she could no longer have children. Against the diagnosis of the doctors, she conceived, and the two had a daughter. But when the girl was 5 years old, she fell from a tree that is in the front yard and died on the spot. The husband became severely depressed and locked himself in the study. The study is now my younger brother's bedroom. The room went virtually unchanged from when we got possession of the house. The husband was so depressed that he hung himself from the large old tree that is in the backyard. It's dead smack in the center of the yard, and the wife moved out and sold the house after 20 years or so to my dad in 1998. Since then, it has undergone a full renovation with additions, but the study has remained the same. My dad likes it for the wood paneling walls with built-in shelves and looks very rustic. The two trees involved, the little girl's climbing tree and the hanging tree, remain where they are. The tree where the girl died is thriving and beautiful, but the father's tree is dead and ready to be cut down. Thing is, when the couple lived there, the trees were placed under law to never be cut down, so my father has no choice but to leave them standing. He says that he's afraid to cut them down anyway. He wants to remove the back one because it's a creepy eyesore straight from The Conjuring, that he is legitimately terrified that it will subsequently kill the beautiful tree in the front of the house. Here is where things get interesting. I first would like to start off by saying I know for a fact that I close more doors than I open. I have many siblings, but the door that opens most frequently is the one to my older brother's room, the prior master bedroom, when the couple owned it, which is the only room that has a view to the suicide tree. My brother lives in Boston, so he's never home, and the room is never touched, and the door remains closed. Until about 3 a.m. every night, when I wake up to go to the bathroom, and it's cracked open about a third of the way. This happens most nights, but isn't much of a story. The real experience is indisputable in my mind. I'm sitting in the basement watching TV in the only downstairs room, which has a door leading into the backyard where the suicide tree is. I am alone. It's about 1 a.m. No one else is in the house, when out of nowhere I feel my head being pulled by the right ear. At first, I didn't think anything of it, since I have 4 siblings. I about died when I remembered my solitude. I snapped my head around and the sensation stopped as I observed the continued silence besides the quiet television. I wait about 30 seconds before I decide that it might be best to leave the room, when a large, old, wood-framed comfy chair cracks in half. I run the hell out of there and straight to my room on the 2nd floor, where I lock the door and leave on the lights. My conclusion is that the father is a very mean spirit that constantly torments my brothers, as our rooms overlook the backyard. But the little girl watches over my sisters, which have bedrooms overlooking the girl's tree in front. My sisters are always telling stories of how they sometimes hear laughter from the front yard on quiet days. Our dogs absolutely love the front yard tree, but refuse to even go near the backyard. In fact, none of us like going deep into the backyard because it has a vibe about it that deters anyone and anything. It is strong and definitely there. It's far-fetched, I know, but what happened wasn't a coincidence in my mind. Something physical affected me, and you'd have to be a blind quadriplegic to not notice the signs I experienced. When I was 2 to 5 months old, my family lived in a trailer on a piece of property with an old large white house on it, built in the late 1800s. My father was born in 1917 in a small community in rural Louisiana that went bust during the Great Depression. But at one point it had a general store, train station, post office, etc. Now it's just a block, gold dust loop, amid a bunch of fields in central Louisiana. Anyway, the large white house was the doctor's house. I was born in 83. Dad was 66 when I was born. I'll be clear, he didn't believe in anything. Ghosts, aliens, nothing supernatural. If he had never seen it, it didn't exist, period. He told stories about what the town used to be like when he was young, and one of the stories was that of the doctor's wife, that she took their kid and left him. She and their kid disappeared, so the story was that she ran off. Sometime in the late 30s or so, the doctor committed suicide afterwards, and the large white house went unoccupied and was boarded up. As I said, when I was born, we lived in a trailer on that property. My dad bought another trailer and had been a carpenter back in the day, so he built a large home a couple of lots over, using the two trailers, and built a frame around them. Now, when I started talking, I started telling all these stories about an old man that I had all kinds of adventures with and called him my grandpa. I had no grandpa alive at the time. Parents brushed it off as an overactive imagination, and in time I forgot all about it. Years later, I'm talking to my dad after a news story about an earthquake, and he mentions feeling tremors when I was younger in our house at night, to which I replied that it was impossible, since Louisiana didn't have any earthquakes. Well, in typical old man fashion, he became agitated and swore that occasionally his bed would shake at night. Weird. Before my mother passed away, she told my sister not to live in the house with her daughters and to sell it instead because she thought something bad was there. When asked to elaborate, she said the whole time we lived there she occasionally heard voices when no one was in the house and footsteps. She was very sick and had moved out of the house, and after her and my father separated, then passed away shortly thereafter. I don't think my sister really paid much attention to what she said. She would end up moving into the house a few months later. A few years later, I'm in Texas. My sister is now living in the house where we grew up. She called me freaked the hell out, complained that she heard an old man's voice and a woman's voice arguing, and a child's voice. I roll my eyes and brush it off. Then my older brother goes over and leaves that night, claiming he heard the same. So then, being the religious people they are, and I'm an atheist, they call a local pastor, and this goes on for about 2 weeks with increasing intensity. They do a blessing, and as they are finishing, my sister's dog goes berserk outside for no apparent reason, and the 3 lawn chairs on the porch are thrown into the yard with no one else on the porch. There were 4 witnesses to all of this, claiming they saw the same thing happen. I didn't witness it, but I would have certainly liked to have seen it for myself. In any case, after thinking about it and having read a lot of supernatural experiences, I think it's plausible that all these experiences are linked together. The doctor that killed himself, the missing wife and kids, my old man imaginary friend, my dad's bed shaking, and the eventual ghostly noises and occurrences. It doesn't really frighten me, but it definitely makes me really curious. My sister contacted me yesterday with news about it. So my sister gave it to her daughter, who lived in it for several years and eventually moved out, partially due to the weird stuff, but also because it was in really bad shape. Well, my niece decided to sell the land and have the house torn down because of how bad of a shape it was in. The 2 guys she hired to tear it down quit after a week. The main guy got so spooked after thinking there must be a squatter living there from the noises he heard, but never found anyone. He asked his brother-in-law to come over and help, and the brother-in-law didn't believe in any supernatural stuff either. They both heard noises, and the last day there, the door in the room they were tearing down a wall in closed by itself, and they had to use a sledgehammer to knock down the door to get out. They both ran from the house and left their tools there, and said they weren't going back in for them, and would not be returning, and that they should just burn the house down. I was on a hitchhiking adventure from British Columbia, Canada to Antigua, Guatemala, which started in September of 2019. This post is taken from the notes in my journal, which I wrote as soon as I could after this insane experience. If you've ever hitchhiked before, you'll know how amazing it is, and how many cool people you can meet. Out of the thousands of rides across 40 countries, I've only ever had 2 bad and/or dangerous encounters thumbing it. And this was my second one. I was taking a break from traveling to find weed trim work in California's Nevada City, a beautiful little town with a very interesting crowd, but got stuck a few towns over for not getting a ride all day. I ended up sleeping a night at the Love's gas station, which I had done plenty of times before. I've slept on worse places, at least Love's has a bathroom. In the morning I was a little more desperate to accept rides because no one was stopping and it had already been a whole day. I just wanted to get out of there. A pickup truck is speeding past me and slams the brakes ahead, then slowly backs up. Inside is a man and woman in their late 50s, and he says in a husky voice, "Where you heading, boy?" "Nevada City. Any distance helps." "Get in. We're gonna Uber." They seemed normal enough, even without most of their teeth and hair, so I jumped in, and this all happened in rapid succession. I toss my bag in the back and jump in. I shut the door when I notice a pile of guns and bullets on the floor. Before I have time to rethink my decision, we speed off. So I'm trying to assess whether or not I'm in danger, and they start telling me how this guy just got out of jail for aggravated assault and how he beat that guy up so bad he can't think straight no more. And they both laugh. She's holding his seatbelt over his chest and they both smell like feces. And they start asking how much money I have. And I think, yep, I am not safe here. After hitchhiking all this way, I don't look particularly wealthy. I'm filthy, I need a shower, and look no different than the stereotypical homeless guy. So I try to seem more poor than I am. And more tough than I am too. I'm broke as hell, man. That's why I'm going into the city, hoping to make some cash trimming. The man looks me in the eye. "Well, you'll find it all right. You'll find it good. Don't be afraid to do no dirty work. If people try, they try and mess with you. You mess with them back, you get what I'm saying? Put your eyes on the damn road, Christ!" The woman points forward, and he swerves back into the right lane. He asks me if I smoke, and knowing that California has legalized weed, I put 2 and 2 together. He's offering me a joint, so I say, "Yeah, I smoke." With a wild look in his eyes, he exclaims, "Great," and we turn off the highway and start down a dirt road. I'm now more than worried and look behind us. In the back of the truck is my bag, a chainsaw, a pickaxe, and a plastic tarp over something. This didn't help my anxiety. Finally, we stop in front of a clearing. The woman takes out not a joint, but a meth pipe. This was the first time I've seen a meth pipe, and a lot of things start to make sense. While he lights up and exhales in the car, I've never seen smoke so white, by the way, I roll the window down as fast as possible because I didn't want to smoke that. The woman takes some as well, and they tell me how they were going to collect money that a woman owes them. "The damn woman's going to pay one way or another. Damn straight. She better have the money, or I'm going to grab her and say, 'Where's my money?' Oh, she'll have it all right. She'll have it or else. Say, son, you ever steal something? 'Cause we could make $20,000 today." I don't know exactly how to answer this guy, and he repeats, $20,000 today. Here, smoke some of this. He hands me the pipe. Nothing like meth, ain't that right? I gently reject it and say that meth's not really my thing, which he surprisingly takes well and smokes some more before putting it away and drives off back towards the highway. His driving is terrible, swerving, speeding, hitting brakes abruptly, and starts trying to convince me to help them steal marijuana plants. You hold my gun, I'll drill the hole, I'll keep lookout. Yeah, baby girl will keep lookout. Now you gotta be careful if you hear the dogs, 'cause these guys are nasty, see? The dogs bite. And he reveals what looks like a terrible scar on his arm. I didn't really know what to do or how to get out of this situation, so I sounded as confident as possible and said that I was meeting a friend to look for work together and that they could be expecting me today. We neared the end of Yuba City where they pull over to the side. Well, it's your funeral. You don't want to eat, fine by me, but if you ever want the cash, you call me. And hands me his number. Hell no, I think. Thanks, I will. Quickly retrieving my bag and smiling nervously. The woman with a wave says, Take care now, God bless. And they speed off. I'm standing on the side of the road thinking, what the hell was that? Happy to be out of the car. Meth head 1 and 2, thanks for the offer to steal marijuana, but let's never meet again. My mother did all her gynecology appointments with a doctor in downtown Austin. He was on the 5th floor of this hospital building and had a long-time nurse/receptionist called Allison. I remember attending her appointments when I was little and being in the waiting room, which was colorfully decorated with a forest scene. Allison was a super sweet woman who was half babysitter for us kids too. She would read us books, give us coloring books, and occasionally even listen to our dreadful knock-knock jokes. We'd all refer to her as Alice in Wonderland. Anyway, years down the road I got married and pregnant and started searching for an OB since I had moved back to Austin relatively recently before that. My mother suggested I go see if that doctor, who was super young, below 30s when I was born, was still in business. Well, I could not find his name in the hospital directory, so I figured I would just swing by the office and check. My mother happened to be in town as she had moved years ago and came with me. We both joked about being so familiar, but reverse situations now. As we reached the stairs, we ran into a problem. There was no 5th floor to the hospital office building. Odd. We both must have misremembered it. We knew it was on the top floor, so it must have been the 4th. Nope, not there. We thought perhaps we were in the wrong building, except we parked in the same parking garage from 20 years ago and walked the same route. That doctor does not exist. Never did, apparently. My mother and my brother and I are the only ones who remember him in Alice in Wonderland. We've asked around, including amongst the hospital staff. We even looked up our birth certificates, which are new copies, and just list attending physician. One of my childhood memories is fake, but somehow shared with my brother and mother. What the hell is going on? When I was around 8 or 9, I was coming back from school with my grandmother. We were walking, as my grandmother's house was 100 meters from the school. In the road to the school there was a ruined red house. From the broken windows you could see damaged stuff, dust, garbage and the like. The house had a weird atmosphere, and my grandmother once told me that there was an old couple living there but they passed away, many years before I was even born. So that day, we were walking as usual, to home from school, and I vividly remember how the door was open, and inside was old furniture but not damaged. I mean, not any more a ruined house from the inside. At the doorstep there was an old man, and by his side an old woman, and they greeted us like long-term friends. I thought that was strange, as the description of my grandmother matched the two people there. Later in the afternoon, I went to my grandmother and asked her about who those people at the house were, and my grandmother said that she didn't remember seeing anyone. So I got out, went to the house, and it was, as always, ruined, no one inside. The house itself is now demolished, and the weird stuff is that my grandma doesn't remember anything about that. My grandmother wasn't even mentally ill or anything, and was barely 60 years old, so I don't know what the hell happened. I live in a very quiet and peaceful neighborhood, on a dead-end road. At the time, my aunt, who lived 2 houses down from my family, was having some issues with her kitchen sink. My father is very handy and can fix or build just about anything, so he agreed to check it out. My mother and brother were out, but I was about 16 years old at the time and was well accustomed to staying home by myself. It was broad daylight and during the summer. However, my father still said he would check on me from time to time. My father went to go fix my aunt's sink, and as promised, he did walk back home from time to time to see if I was all right. My room is on the 2nd floor of the house and in the left-hand corner. In order to see who comes into our house, I have to exit my room and peer down the staircase, which is directly in front of our front door. This is not far. The staircase is about 6 feet from my bedroom door, and every time my father walked in to check on me, I walk out of my room to see him and speak to him from the top of the steps. About an hour after the last check-in that my father did with me, I heard the front door open. Our front door is very old and has chimes on it. You can hear it open from any part of the house. As soon as my father opened the door, he called out to me and began asking if I was okay and if I was hungry. As I was conversing with him, I started to walk towards my open bedroom door so that I could go out onto the landing and speak with him easier. But as I was walking, my phone rang. I turned around and walked back to my bed to pick it up, and the caller ID just said, "Dad." I will admit upon seeing the caller ID I was a little perplexed, but then I figured my father might have butt-dialed me, as he'd recently gotten a new phone and the touchscreen was activated by other objects too. "Dad, are you calling me?" I called downstairs and decided to pick up the phone anyway. For no reason at all, I jokingly answered, "Hello?" I did not expect to hear my father on the other end of the phone say, "Hey, just finishing up over here. I'll be over soon." I fell deathly silent. I heard my father continue to speak with me on the phone, but I am also hearing my father, the same exact voice, speak to me from downstairs in the living room. I whispered into the phone, "Dad, where are you?" He proceeded to tell me that he was at my aunt's house, and that I already knew that. I would like to add that on the phone, in the background, I could hear my aunt and her kids. My father then asked me if I was hungry, and I'm now shaking uncontrollably, and in the background I hear our front door open and close. I'm sweating. My mind was working a mile a minute to understand what the hell was going on. While also being in a state of immense fear, I tell my father something along the lines of cutting it out, and that he just asked me that because he literally just walked out the front door. My father told me the last time he came back was around 1 p.m, and to tell him what I'm talking about. I have 15 steps in my house. It took me about 2 to leap down all of them and get out. I ran to my aunt's house with no shoes. I didn't even remember if I closed the door or not. I was shaking and in tears, and unable to explain what happened. I try not to think about it. Me and my mother were driving through our small town in southwest Virginia. My mother and father are divorced, and he lived in Tennessee. Anyway, they had very different viewpoints on helping out hitchhikers, as my dad was very much into hiking, camping, etc. But there was a woman walking down the road, mind you, and it was very hot outside. It was the summer, and I noticed she was carrying a child swaddled up in a blanket, which struck me as a poor choice considering it was the middle of summer. Just seemed too warm for a swaddle. So I said to my mum, "We really should pick up that woman. Surely she isn't too far from where she needs to go, and she has a baby." And to my surprise, my mum pulls up into the gas station parking lot, tells me to go in and get a large bottle of water, and we will ask her if she would like a ride. So we pull out the gas station and approach the thin, almost sickly-looking woman, and she very quietly just grabbed the door handle and got inside, not saying anything, not even a thank you, which really didn't sit right with me because this is the South. Everyone is friendly and approachable for the most part. So we ask where she needs to go, and me being in the passenger seat, I turn to look at her, and she's looking down at her baby and cooing at it. She replies without ever looking up from the swaddled being, "About 2 miles past the Dollar General, 1 Jeb Stewart." We were very close to that area, I decide to turn and speak to the woman and maybe get a conversation flowing, but as I get a better look at her baby, it was actually a drywall hammer wrapped up in a blanket inside another blanket. I froze. It was like I'd walked into a deep freezer. I told my mum I really think we should stop because I hear what sounds like knocking, and was very adamant we needed to stop at the upcoming Dollar General. As we pulled in, I told my mum to get out the car and that I needed her help locating the noise, and we met each other at the hood of the car where I told her, "Mum, that's not a baby. She has a hammer in that blanket." To which my mother advised me that we should walk inside to see if they had anything to help close that up, and told the woman we would be right back. We walk inside and told them to call the police so that they could help us with this woman, that we could no longer have her in our vehicle, and explained why. My mum gave us some vague reason as to why we couldn't take her further, and she got out of the vehicle very angrily, but almost confused, and we left her in the parking lot. She very well could have just been a really confused woman, with some mental issues perhaps. I don't know. But what I do know is that I don't think she had good intentions for us. So to the lady with the drywall hammer, let's not meet. I started my first part-time job at 16, at a place where most of my co-workers were older college people. I didn't act like a 16-year-old idiot, so I got to be friends with them, and they would invite me to parties and such. They had just moved into a new house because the rent was half of what they were paying before. I had overheard them saying they didn't like it and were looking for something else, but no one had given any specific reason as to why. I figured it was because the house was in a semi-rough shape and was located in a run-down older part of town. One evening, Dave invites me to hang out for pizza, beer, and movie night. I get over there, and Dave has already got the refreshments ready. We then pick a movie. I go to sit down on a couch that was against the back wall, but he motions for me to come to the one on the other side of the room, which faced into the open kitchen and hallway, which led to the other bedrooms. A little while into the movie, I begin to see the lights being turned off from under the cracks of the back bedroom doors. I kind of wonder why his roommates didn't come out and get some pizza or watch the film. I then hear one of the bedroom doors open and close a few times. Dave turns the TV up a little. A few minutes later, I hear people walking around in the back of the house, and Dave turns the TV up some more. A short while after that, I hear someone talking loud enough to be heard over the TV, but not enough to understand what exactly was being said. I look at Dave, and he has this weird look on his face, and he turns the TV up louder still. Then a door slams shut, the TV gets turned up some more, and finally I see movement out of the corner of my eye, and turn to look, thinking one of the roommates has come out of the back bedroom into the kitchen. No one is there, but the kitchen cabinets are now open, when moments before they had been closed. All of the hairs stand up on my arms and my neck, and I jump up. I look over at Dave, and I could tell by his face he knew why I had jumped up, and I ask him what the hell is going on. Dave proceeds to tell me that they had been experiencing stuff like this since they moved in. The reason I was invited over that evening was because his other roommates had gone out of town, and Dave did not want to be alone in the house. There was also the reason why he took the couch that did not have a view of the kitchen and hallway leading to the back bedrooms. Needless to say, I left immediately, was extremely pissed about being invited into a freaking haunted house without a heads up, and about 2 months later they suddenly moved out of the house, with such speed that they left some stuff behind. It took a little prying, but Dave said he woke up, and an old woman was leaning over his bed and looking down at him. He said he screamed and raised his hands to defend himself, and she just disappeared. This happened a few years ago, and still creeps me out. I lived in a haunted house for over 2 decades. The house was built in the early 1700s. It was a beautiful, rambling old house with a big garden, outbuildings, 5 bedrooms, and working fireplaces. My parents, my 3 siblings, and I were overjoyed to be moving into this spacious house after living in a cramped 2.5 bedroom terrace with no garden. My parents had bought the house for an incredibly low price, even for the 90s. It was cheap. I do wonder now if it was something to do with the hauntings. It wasn't before long that we realized we weren't the only residents. A few days after we moved in, my mum was downstairs in the long hallway, which ran the length of the house from the front door to the kitchen, past the wide old staircase, as she watched this form of a shadow that seemed to be dressed in Jacobean clothing based on the silhouette, walk along the wall and then disappear into the wall by the stairs, as if he had walked through a door that wasn't there. But that was only the start. We quickly got used to seeing and hearing things that weren't there. We'd constantly see black shapes swiftly moving out of the corner of our eyes. When we turned to look, there'd be no one there. Late at night, after everyone had gone to bed, we would often hear voices talking softly at the base of the stairs. It sounded like 3 or 4 men murmuring to each other, like a group of people planning something. But if we went to the stairs to listen, the voices abruptly stopped. Now bear in mind, this was a detached house with thick, solid walls, and only a quiet couple for neighbors. We called the voices the murmuring men, and grew quite fond of them. My brother liked to stay up late and play video games in his room, between the hours of 2 to 4 a.m. He would often see a woman standing in his bedroom. She was wearing an apron over a Victorian dress. He told us about it, and we all agreed it was weird. Later, when we were having the house renovated, we discovered old servant bells in his room. So perhaps she had been a servant and was checking the young master to see if he wanted anything. As well as seeing and hearing things, there were other indications that we weren't alone. Things would go missing, like objects you'd swear you'd left on the side. We'd all look high and low with no sign of whatever it was, then later that same object would turn up in an incredibly unlikely place, like on top of a wardrobe or somewhere that had already been searched. We even joked that the house had taken it, and sometimes exasperated, my mum would yell, "Come on, house, this isn't funny, give it back," which usually resulted in it showing up a day or so later. But despite these ghostly goings-on, it was a very cozy home. Everyone who visited it noted how welcoming and open the house felt. After my parents divorced, that changed. My mother continued to live in the house with us kids and made some adjustments so that she could put it on the market. I don't know if that alone shook the spirits up, or whether it was because we were all sad and depressed following the divorce, and those emotions were feeding things, but the atmosphere in the house changed completely. It grew heavy and depressive. You would feel like someone was watching you in the hallway, and none of us kids would go upstairs at night alone. We'd wait and go together. You just did not want to be alone in the hallway or on the stairs. That feeling that something was right behind you was so intense. My sister had to go downstairs alone at one point, and she was walking back to the stairs and heard booted footsteps walking behind her. She shut her eyes and ran back upstairs as quickly as she could. One afternoon, I was in my room reading, and I suddenly heard a woman sobbing loudly. She sounded like her heart was broken. I thought it must be my mom or perhaps my sister, so I ran out onto the landing and called out, "Mum? Sis? What is it?" There was no one there. The noise stopped. I ran downstairs and my mum and sister were sitting, chatting happily in the kitchen. They were fine. They hadn't heard a thing. 6 months later, my brother and sister heard the same woman crying, and my brother thought he'd seen what looked like a swish of dark blue skirt on the landing, but he couldn't be sure. My mum came upstairs one night to her bedroom and found every item on her dressing table had been pushed to the floor as if someone had swept it off. We'd all been downstairs, and her window was closed. Finally, late one evening, my sister was doing the washing up in the kitchen. The sink was in front of a large swash window. The glass in the windows is old. I don't know if it's as old as the house, but it's thick and very wavy and distorts the reflection in them. As she was washing up, she felt the presence of someone in the room with her, someone taller than her standing behind her. She thought it must be one of our brothers. She looked up to see a tall reflection in the window. She turned around to speak to them and no one was there. My mum called the local vicar and he came round with a specialist colleague and blessed the house. They sprinkled holy water and said prayers and it definitely seemed to help. The house felt lighter and we didn't see or hear anything else. My mum sold the house and at the same time I left home and moved into my own home. Someone else lives there now, and I often wonder if the spirits have come out again to see the new owners. To understand this story, you're going to need a bit of information about me. I'm a 38-year-old man from Philadelphia. Growing up, I was a real loner. I had a few close acquaintances, but nothing more than that. When I was about 11, a family from Japan moved next door, and I became fast friends with their two daughters, Ayumi and Shoko. They were my closest friends on the planet. They even helped me get my first girlfriend, but things started to come to an abrupt end during our senior year of high school. They broke the news that they were moving back to Japan after they graduated. There was no stopping it either. After they left, and with no real direction, I enlisted in the military. Fast forward 13 years and I'm stationed in Korea. During one of the nights out, I'm enjoying the sights and sounds when I see a familiar face. And based on the unique way he was smoking his cigarette, I quickly knew it was their father. He was there on some business trip, and we caught up and exchanged emails, and he promised to tell the family I said hello and sent my regards. A few weeks later, he emailed me with a job offer in Japan and I jumped on it. I gave him my exit date from the military and he got me a work visa. Things were looking up, reunited with my best friends again. But this is where the curveball comes in. Shoko picked me up from the airport in Tomaya, and she looked at me dead in the eyes. "You remember my sister Ayumi, right?" she asked. Emphatically, I replied, "Yeah, you are both my only real friends." She turned pale and hung her head, then told me she doesn't exist anymore. Confused and thinking perhaps her English was slipping after all these years of not using it, I asked, fearing she'd passed on. She said the following, and I can still remember it verbatim to this day. "I don't know what happened, but one day I woke up and she was gone. No one seems to remember her either." She took me to the apartment her family had set up for me and made me promise not to say anything to her family. I reluctantly agreed based on how hard she was pleading. That night I called my family back in the US and I asked if they remembered anything about her and her family. They all remembered the family and Shoko, but not Ayumi. I had them send my things to me knowing I had photos of the three of us in my family gatherings and parties from family events. A few weeks go by and my things came. All the photos were of me and Shoko, not a single one with Ayumi. Now I fully understand what Shoko meant when she said she didn't exist. It was like she was wiped completely from the face of the earth. So I did what any rational person would have done and started freaking out. Me and Shoko, being the only ones to remember her, started researching things related like this. Over time, we grew closer and eventually got married. We've been together 3 years now, still live in Japan, and every day we look into this further. If there is anyone out there who knows anything about this, or has any information that could be useful, you have no idea how greatly we would appreciate it. I rented a cheap bi-level duplex in a bad neighborhood for 3.5 years so that I could save money to buy a house. First thing I did after unpacking and moving in was bolstering security. I changed the deadbolt on the front door and installed a locking doorknob in place of the crusty non-locking one that there was. All of the windows were old, crappy aluminium slider-style windows with horrible locks, and the back door was a patio door going straight onto a deck. So I bought a hardwood 1x4 and 2x4 and cut pieces to put in the windows and door tracks to stop any potential intruders who would have to break the window rather than simply opening one to gain entry. I'm convinced that a past tenant was a drug dealer. In the first 6 months, I had 4 separate instances of tweakers knocking on the door asking for Sam. A couple of the tweakers forlornly stepped off when I told them that no one named Sam lived there. 2 others got worked up, asked where Sam had gone and where he was living, to which I responded that I had rented the place and had no idea who Sam was. After being visited by the tweakers, I redoubled my efforts to ensure that all doors were locked at all times. But I still forgot to lock the front door once in a while, and had a very creepy experience one night after forgetting to do just that. I was in the middle of cooking dinner one evening, and went to the washroom. After washing my hands and exiting the washroom, I came back into my kitchen to see a middle-aged Asian man dressed in all black coming up the stairs from the entrance into my kitchen. "Who the hell are you?" I asked. Startling him, he said he was there to fix a toilet. I was sure I was going to die, but figured I ought to talk to the guy for a few seconds before lunging for a kitchen knife and fighting for my life. The guy explained that the landlord, Gary, had sent him to fix a toilet, and I told him that Gary wasn't my landlord and my toilets were working fine. He asked what address he was at. I gave him mine, and he started profusely apologizing, saying he had the wrong address. He backed down the stairs cautiously, put on his boots, and sheepishly left the duplex. I'm still not sure if he was looking for Sam to square up some unpaid debts, and when he realized that Sam wasn't there, if he was looking for a woman to prey on, but found me instead, and reconsidered his insidious plan, or if he was just some real poor sap who walked into a stranger's house on a mission to fix a toilet for Gary. But I never mistakenly left the door at that place unlocked again. Years back, when I was still smoking pot, I decided to head back to my friend's house up the road, which was close to 4 miles. My car wasn't working, but man, I really needed to get high. So I started hiking down the main road from my parents' house to my friend's house. I was maybe halfway there when a car pulled up next to me. A man in the driver's seat said, "I'll take you to where you want to go." Being a naive dumb kid, I agreed, and as soon as I got in the car I felt the strangest vibe coming from him, like he wanted to put his greasy fingers on me. The interior of his car was a mess. Old paper cups, discarded McDonald's bags, cigarette boxes, yet the passenger seat was rather spotless, as if he was expecting to have someone ride with him. The conversation that took place began pleasantly but took an odd turn. "So, where you heading?" "Oh, you know, a friend's house, gonna have some fun." "Yeah, I like to have fun too. Mind if I party with you guys?" "Oh, I'm sorry, but he doesn't like strangers visiting." "Oh, too bad." The rest of the car ride was quiet, and only lasted maybe 10 minutes. He stopped in front of my friend's house, and I shook his hand. It was clammy and sweaty. I stepped out, went inside, and didn't see him again. Until 6 months later, when I was watching a news report on the TV, and saw my ride being sentenced to 8 life terms. The man that gave me that ride was none other than Ronald Dominique. To add some context, Ronald J. Dominique confessed to murdering 23 men over 9 years and dumping their bodies in sugarcane fields, ditches, and small bayous in 6 southeast Louisiana parishes. His reason for killing? He didn't want to return to jail after raping the men. Me and a good friend are watching my girlfriend's house. She has 2 dogs and we decided to stay there, as it was only going to be 5 days, so no big deal. So we did pretty much nothing the first day, ate top ramen and watched the Science Channel. We're pretty cool, I know. The house is pretty creepy. It's an older house that used to be an old speakeasy that burnt down a long time ago and was rebuilt to be the current house. I don't know if it's true. It's quite possible, it could be, that my girlfriend's dad is messing with me. But what I do know is while I was asleep, My friend woke me up and asked if I turned the oven on. Apparently it turned on by itself. It happened several times through the week, and we were rightfully freaked out. One day I go home and do stuff around the house, so I left him at the house alone. I soon got desperate texts that the dogs were freaking the hell out, and he heard heavy footsteps upstairs. Now I thought he was just milking it and being a dick and trying to mess with me, but the next day he left to go out with his girlfriend, and the same thing happened to me. But I was upstairs in the shower and I heard clear heavy footsteps and no one was home, and the dogs were freaking the hell out downstairs. I literally stayed in the shower for half an hour to build up the courage to check the house. I've told my girlfriend and she claims it's just mice. So, these mice weigh well over 100 pounds, as they were some heavy-ass footsteps, similar to a man with boots on. True story. First, some background on me, as to establish some basic human credibility before I recount the events that have caused me immense anxiety and depression. I am a 21-year-old male student at Long Beach State, looking to graduate in political science this coming spring. I am also an alumni member of a fraternity on campus. I don't do drugs, and during the course of these events I used marijuana once. In mid-January 2011, my best friend Ryan, fraternity pledge brother, and I looked to move out of the frat house in hopings of bringing some form of normalcy back to our lives. We found an apartment for rent in our price range, $1,200 for a 2-bedroom in downtown Long Beach, so we followed up and made it happen. The day after we moved in, something strange occurred. I went to take my second shower since moving in, and 5 minutes into it was greeted by my neighbor from downstairs complaining that massive amounts of water were leaking into her unit from ours. I checked the water heater and found water gushing from an emergency release valve on the top, which is never supposed to be opened. A few weeks later, in late February, I come home from my crappy job at the CSULB bookstore and find my roommate locked out on our second-story balcony. He knocks on the glass door and I let him in. I think it's hilarious and ask him how long he was locked out for. Turns out he was locked out for 6 hours. Because his right arm was in a splint from shoulder surgery, he wasn't able to climb down. He also didn't have his cell phone. He told me he swore the door was unlocked when he went out for a cigarette. We agreed it was kind of strange, but laughed about him being stuck out there for 6 hours. A few days later, Ryan offered me a bowl to celebrate our new lives away from the frat house. I don't often smoke, but decided it would be fun. I go to bed 45 minutes later, and out of nowhere I am at the most terrified I've ever been in my life. I felt a strange sensation, and I have the overwhelming feeling that there was some manifestation of negative energy in my room. I was hearing thoughts that weren't mine, and they were unpleasant. My closed door was bouncing back and forth, so I closed my windows and it continued. I frantically grabbed my phone from the windowsill to text Ryan in the next room. My phone shows one new text, so I click the message box, but there's no new message. Convenient time for an iPhone glitch, right? Ryan tells me that I need to calm down and go to bed. The next morning I wake up and convince myself that it was all the result of smoking that bowl and go about as usual. A few weeks went by before one day when I go to work and get a text from Ryan saying that he's locked out again. So I leave work early to get home and let him in. When I got home and let him in, he was a little freaked out. He told me this time he left the door cracked open a few inches and that it slammed shut on him on its own and latched right after. To latch this heavy glass sliding door, you must push the lock up against gravity. We were both pretty disturbed, but for the next few weeks we went about our lives. On March 15th, 2011, I went home after my classes and discovered Ryan's room completely torn apart. It looked like the place had been ransacked. There were clothes everywhere, items knocked over, and his heavy wooden desk had been completely knocked over and the pencil tray had been pulled out all the way and dumped. It looked like a tornado had come through. I looked through the glass door, and see Ryan locked out on the balcony, and he starts banging on the glass. "Chris, let me in, man, hurry up." I open the door for him, and the first thing he says to me is, "Bro, all of this stuff happened while I was out there, and I watched my room get completely torn apart by some invisible force for half an hour." He swears that he went out for a smoke, and that this time he left the door halfway open when he hears the door begin to slide shut on its own. He grabs it as quick as he can and catches it before it closes, but the force of the door was too strong and actually pulled him with it. Ryan swears that he smoked his way through a pack of cigarettes as he watched his room be ransacked by some invisible force. I was freaked the hell out and wanted nothing more than to get the hell out of there and never return. I told Ryan I thought that maybe we should get out of the apartment for a while, but he just wanted to clean his room and ignore it. I couch surfed for about a week before regaining the courage to go back and face this thing. The weeks and months that followed were among the worst of my life. Any peace of mind that I had in my own bedroom was lost. When I wanted to fall asleep, strange things would start to happen. My closed door would start to shake back and forth, and occasionally I would hear a violent bang on the door. It got to the point where I would put my shoes up against the door to stop it from banging back and forth, and then one morning I woke up and found that one of those shoes had been moved to the other side of the room. Brian would go home to San Diego on the weekends, which meant that I was often alone. I would hear footsteps on my carpet next to me as I tried to fall asleep regularly, and I would sense overwhelming negative energy. In short, when it was around our apartment, I could feel it. I would get goosebumps out of nowhere and could just sense it. It was a very strange sensation, and I'm afraid I can't effectively describe it to you. My sleeping habits deteriorated and my grades began to drop like stones. We didn't know how to deal with it, so we started to ignore it. But I can tell you that it was very difficult to ignore. I found that it was nearly impossible for me to fall asleep before 2 a.m., no matter how hard I tried. Something would always keep me up. The growling sound was the worst. It was low-pitched and extremely creepy. For a while I thought it was an aeroplane, but after going outside and not being able to hear the sound, I concluded that the source was indeed inside the apartment. I'm having trouble piecing the rest of the events in order, so I would just list some of the creepy stuff that happened. During the day in mid-April, Ryan's girlfriend Taylor came over. We were trying to put a movie in the Xbox when the power went out. To our surprise, the power outage was restricted to our 2 bedrooms and not the rest of the apartment. Strange. So we decided to play Uno on the carpet in the main room. While playing, we all 3 heard the sound of something sliding across our tile countertop in the kitchen. I go to investigate and find that it was their bottle of Andre champagne. Classy, I know. A few weeks ago, days before we broke our lease and moved out, I was home alone again and in my room on Reddit. I look across the room at my MacBook charger and notice that it was moving on its own, back and forth and making strange shapes like it was alive. I left the room and went into the kitchen. I opened the cupboard and discovered that my unopened box of honey bunches of oats, bomb I know, had been torn open and the bag had been pulled out at a very strange angle. I decided to leave and spend the night at the fraternity house. I have many more accounts of strange events that occurred while living there. It certainly was a creepy experience. In college, I frequented a trail in the Appalachian Mountains near my college. Each time I would trek further and further, I never saw anyone on it, no matter how good the weather was. So, I just saw it as my own personal trail. For a while I would walk to a large stream and turn back since it was wide and deep, and I didn't want to get my boots soaking wet. One day I was determined to cross the stream, so I moved several planks of sturdy dead tree to make a makeshift bridge. I crossed to the other side and everything felt subtly different. The air was different, the sky brighter, and surprisingly the trail on the other side was much better maintained than the part I'd come from. As I kept walking, I was noticing a lot of old soda cans lying around, the ones that are more perfectly cylindrical. I wasn't seeing any of the modern-looking soda can designs. I passed an old cabin. It was occupied, so I didn't bother investigating and went along my way. I kept walking until I got to a wider, deeper stream. I wouldn't be able to make a bridge to cross that, though, so I turned around and headed back. I distinctly remember the sky turning overcast within a few minutes. I couldn't clearly see the sky since the trees blocked a lot of my view. I had just assumed a cloud had passed across the sun, but when I got a better look, the sky was completely different. It felt like I was walking along a completely different trail. This is the craziest part. I looked over to where the cabin had been to find nothing but the remains of the cabin. All that was left was the stone chimney. I had walked by the cabin an hour back, but there weren't any ashes or any smoke. There was a thick layer of fallen leaves and even some litter. Modern litter like beer bottles and cans with modern logos. I was dumbfounded and explored the cabin's remains for a good hour, until it began to drizzle. I walked back along the trail. The old soda cans were gone. The bridge I had built was gone. I couldn't see the logs further downstream. The rest of the trail was just as I had remembered it. I walked the last mile or so of the trail in darkness and rain, guided by my phone, which never could get reception up in the mountains. So that's my weird time-traveling story. I made a point of wanting to get back to my college town so that I could revisit the trail and see what's on the other side of the second big stream. If anyone lives nearby, I'd love to hear what you can find in the rest of the park loop. I was staying with family friends when I was around 12 years old. Our parents had gone out together for the night. It was myself, my brother 9 years old, and two sisters of 13 and 9, who lived in the house. We were up late watching bad 80s horror movies and eating junk food. At around 1 a.m, the youngest sister made me pause the video so that she could go to the toilet. Less than a minute later, she came running back into the lounge room looking horrified. She blurts out that there is someone trying to get into the toilet window. Being the oldest child in the house, I pretended to not be afraid and go into the kitchen to grab a big knife. Then, the four of us slowly walked towards the toilet, thinking if there is someone there, they will quickly take off when they see the lights go on and voices in the house. So I turn on all the lights as I go through the house towards the toilet. I finally get to the toilet and turn on the light and poke my head around the doorway. Sure enough, there are two hands, carefully and quietly taking the loo window glass panels out one by one. We start yelling and pretending we are in full house with adults. This doesn't slow him down. There is about 10 panels, and 3 or 4 of them have now been removed. If he gets them all, he could easily just climb straight into the house. At this stage, I'm thinking maybe I should slash his hands, but I thought he could get the knife from me. I'm totally bricking it, but I'm trying to stay calm and pretend to be in control. The others at this stage are all whimpering and crying. I suddenly realize they have a dog in the house that's asleep in front of the fire. It's an old lab, but I didn't care. I ran into the lounge to pick up the dog, carry him into the toilet and point his face at the window with the hands poking through it. The dog now goes completely nuts, barking and growling. The hands stop, and I'm hoping they disappear. Thankfully, the guy moves away from the window, and we spend the next few hours huddled together in the lounge with all knives in our hands and keeping the dog awake and sending him into the toilet every hour. Eventually, the parents come home and call the police, who came out and fingerprinted the outside of the toilet. Never heard anything from them. Certainly the most afraid I've ever been, though. This happened almost 13 years ago. I was visiting my grandmother in a rural section of Lake of the Ozarks, near a small town with a hilarious name where I went to high school. I was very familiar with the area, and when visiting my grandmother, I would often walk into town, taking backward trails until I reached the main road going into town. Very rarely, someone would stop and offer a ride, and normally I would accept. It's a small town in a rural area where everyone mostly knows everyone else, so I wouldn't even look up until I was getting in the vehicle. I stopped accepting rides after this. I had just come out of the woods and was walking along the side of the road. I was still maybe a mile or two out of town and enjoying my walk. An older, blue Ford Taurus pulls up next to me. The driver rolls down the passenger window. "Need a ride?" I hear, and start to walk over. I get in and get a good look at my driver. The man looked like a greasier version of Charles Manson. Flat, stringy brown hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in over a week that came down to his jawline. He had salt and pepper, 5 o'clock shadow and piercings, wild blue eyes, and something about him rang every alarm bell in my body. And I went to get back out the car, but we were already in motion. Instead, I began to look around the vehicle. The front was relatively normal and even clean. The back seat was covered with a blanket. On top of the blanket was something that takes up nearly the entire back seat wrapped in a tarp. Whatever it is, stands at about 1.5 feet off the back seat. On top of all of this is a big, black, shaggy dog that was staring right through me. "What are you doing here?" The question slapped me back to the front seat. "I'm sorry, what?" He's staring at me instead of the road. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, I'm visiting my grandma. I live out of town. I go to college. It's about 90 miles from here, and I'm on my way to see some old friends." He frowns. "No." "Why are you here?" I frown a little. Everything is flashing and going red. My mind is yelling for me to get out now. I just told you." My tension is visibly rising. The dog gives a low growl from the back seat. We're passing the sign from the country line, and there's a gas station coming up there that marks the beginning of town. He's still staring at me. "Why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you here?" He screams, out of nowhere, slams his hand at the steering wheel, and I'm huddled against the door, shaking. He pulls me to the gas station. "Give me your glasses." Statement, no question, not emotion. Without question, I hand them over. "Wait here." He goes into the store. I'm frozen in place, shaking, and trying to will my arms or legs to work, trying to start breathing again. I know whatever the hell is going on. I need out fast. The dog gave another low growl and then snapped me into action. I get up, almost rolling out of the car. Shakily, I walk into the store and in an equally shaky voice say to the guy, "This is close enough to where I'm going. I'd like my glasses now, please." My eyesight is very poor, but I could feel the intensity of the glare he gave me. I think the cashier could too, because she took a couple of steps back, closer to the store phone. Silently, he hands me my glasses and continues to stare daggers at me as I put them on, and walks out of the store without saying a word to either of us. The cashier stares at me, clearly freaked out. "What the hell was that?" she asks me. The adrenaline of the situation has started to wear off, and the real gravity starts to sink in. Tears are beginning to silently course down my face. "Can I use your phone, please?" I ask her. She nods and wordlessly hands it to me with a box of tissues. She tells me I can go into the manager's office to make my phone call, and take as much time as I need. I thank her, go back, and let my friends know what just happened. I also tell them I will be cutting through the woods to get to them, because I don't want to see this guy ever again, and that I will be coming out behind the house. I took a few minutes to breathe and relax after I hung up. When I went back out, the cashier asked if I was okay, and asked if there was anything she could do for me. I thanked her again and told her no, and asked if she knew the guy. She had never seen him before and didn't think he was from the area. That shook me even more. I gave her my friend's phone number and asked her to call them if he comes back. I left, cut through the woods to my friend's house, and we had a great afternoon. And when I was ready to leave, they gave me a ride home. At the time it didn't bother me much, but the longer I've had to think about it, the more curious I am about the back seat. That dog wasn't moving from whatever was underneath it, unless the guy told him to. I try not to think about what was under the tarp too much. It just looked like someone lying in the fetal position from behind. I want to point out I'm a 6'1" male that was around 210 pounds at the time, and I wore my hair down to my waist with a full beard. I myself was a little intimidating, and would occasionally accidentally scare people just from my appearance. But the aura that this man gave off nearly had me wetting myself. There was no question he could have overpowered me. I lived in a haunted house. It was an old farmhouse in rural Norway that had a reputation for being haunted. The house belonged to my now ex-wife's family, and no one was staying there, as it was her uncle's summer cottage, and we needed a place to stay, so we used it. It was actually very comfortable, nestled in a valley on a fjord. We brought our cat with us from the US when we moved in, and I loved it there. Everything was pretty normal for the first few months, but that's when the voices started. At first they were indistinguishable, just the muffled noises of women talking, easy enough to dismiss, but then it got more intense. One night the lights came on in the kitchen. We could smell food cooking, and there were women talking in there. Now I should note, she kind of had a nosy family that would just show up whenever they felt like it, but this was 3 a.m. I was more angry than freaked out. I got up and headed towards the kitchen, still hearing the voices, but they stopped as soon as I began to open the kitchen door. I opened it and went inside. The lights were still on, the oven was turned off but warm, and the smell of food lingered in the air. But alas, no one was there. Things started to get more sinister after that. There were screams in the cellar and the attic, usually in the middle of the night, and the cat was getting increasingly agitated as time went on, acting like she could see things that weren't there, chasing things that were invisible, hissing at the air. This led us to the event that had us note right the hell out of there. We woke up to the cat making this horrific howl/screeching noise in the living room. I go to see what's happening, and I didn't see her right away, but there she was. My white, fluffy, blue-eyed cat standing on the ceiling in complete defiance of gravity, eyes glowing red in the country moonlight and howling. My wife came out and saw this and screamed. The cat stopped howling and just stared at us. Then, the cat opened her mouth and said, "Get out," in Norwegian, in the voice of an old woman. As soon as the words were uttered, the red glow faded from her eyes and the cat fell from the ceiling on the floor, got up, and acted like nothing happened. We slept at her parents' that night and moved out the next day. That was enough. I have 3 stories to share. My mum grew up in a house who had a lady fall down the stairs and die. She told me that they were all having dinner at the table, and in the middle was this little table where the top spun. It had sugar, salt, pepper, napkins, toothpicks and stuff, and it started spinning with nobody touching it. They all saw it. On another occasion, my other grandparents would hear things in the attic, like conversations. There were music boxes that would play, and based on some comical and unharmed things I learnt after my grandma passed, I am confident I didn't hear about everything. They had a house blessed by a priest, and after that never heard anything again. The 3rd story. In my old house there was a chain lock on the front door. The chain part was picked up and dropped. I didn't see the picked up part, but heard and saw it swinging. Had a buddy with me on the couch. His exact response was, "What the actual hell?" Another time I was on the couch, my son sleeping upstairs, wife was at bingo. We're not 75 years old, by the way, and heard whispering at the top of the steps. I immediately jumped up thinking it was him. It wasn't. We went upstairs and he was in the same position I left him. 2 others were my son used to tell me there was a man in the basement. And then, looking up at the stairs one time, he saw a pair of black shoes sticking out from around the corner. Both of these were at an age where the kids speak so matter-of-factly, and it just makes it creepier. I remember this like it was yesterday, because for me it was. It was July 22nd, 2011. I had just gotten married to my beautiful wife at the beginning of the month. I was 34 years old. Have you ever wrote your thoughts down knowing you're legally dead? Neither have I until now. Like I said, it was July 2011. I had only been married a few weeks. One day while my wife took a nap, I decided to take a walk. Right across from my house across the street is nothing but woods. According to Google Earth, the woods go on for a while. I may have been walking about half an hour to 45 minutes when I heard a noise. I'm not the kind of guy who believes in ghosts or Bigfoot, and I'm not worried about other people because I always have a knife or gun on me. I'm not scared easy. The noise I heard wasn't like a twig snapping, leaves crunching or rocks falling. It was more like a splash. So I followed the sound and it led me to a small clearing. I saw a creek, but the water wasn't clear like you normally see. Instead it was a light greenish color. It had a glow and fog rose from it. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. Only in horror or sci-fi movies perhaps. As I was looking at the creek and all of its wonders, I heard the splash again. I followed the sound with my eyes and saw a downed tree. I saw part of a person's left hand. I immediately ran over and dropped to my knees to help this guy, and what I saw sticks with me to this day. As the guy raised his head in what I thought was to take a breath, he cut his eyes at me, halfway still in the water, and a smile formed on his face. Just as fast as I saw him, he was gone and disappeared into the air. Gone, no trace of him at all. Then, in what I'm guessing was about an hour, I woke up. I know you're thinking it must have all been a dream, but just wait. I was still in the same spot I fell asleep in. I'd jump up, still feeling a bit dazed, and walk home. A million things were running through my mind, knowing my wife wasn't going to believe what just happened to me. I knew I was going to be in trouble. I finally made it home and tried to open the door, but my keys wouldn't work. Okay, that's weird, I thought. Suddenly, a guy opens the door and asks, "Can I help you?" Keep in mind, I'd never seen this guy before. I asked him who he was, and why he was in my house, where my wife was. Looking confused, he answered, "Son, we've lived in this house for 8 years. We moved in 2011. Even more confused, I asked, "What do you mean, 2011? My wife and I bought this house earlier this month." About this time, a woman walked up to him. I could only assume it was his wife, and whispered something into his ear. About the same time, a cop was pulling into the driveway. I'm guessing that's what she was telling him, and that she had called the police. They took my wallet, knife and gun and placed it on the hood of the squad car. The police questioned me, and the other guy, separately, comparing our stories in just as such confusion as we'd had. The other guy gave the police all the proper paperwork to prove his side and was released to go back into his home. All the attention was then turned on me. I told them I wasn't crazy, to just look at my wallet. I told them I had my ID and to look at the serial number on my gun. Neither would lie. They opened my wallet and laid everything out. There was nothing there but old newspaper clippings about nothing in particular. No ID. The serial number on the gun came back clean. It wasn't stolen, but there was also no name to the owner either. Frustrated, I told them to look. It had been a long day. "You can just drive me to my father-in-law's house, and he'll clear this up," I told them. The police officers looked at each other, then back at me and said, "Sure." And 15 minutes later, we were pulling into my father-in-law's driveway. A smile came across my face, and I breathed a sigh of relief, like a brick had just been taken off my chest. Everything was as I explained it to the officers, and soon everything was going to be okay. One of the officers knocked on my father-in-law's door to talk to him, and the other officer and I waited outside. A few minutes later, the officer and my father-in-law walked out to join us. My father-in-law looked at me with tears in his eyes. He said, "Sir, this officer just told me everything that's going on. I can't imagine what you're going through. I don't know how to tell you this, but I don't know you. I did have a daughter, but she died in a car accident 4 years ago. She'd never been married, nor had children. I don't know how you know these things about me, or what kind of sick game this is, but you need to leave." My heart sank. What in the world was going on? The officer apologized, thanked him for his time, and I asked where we were going, to which they replied, "The station," to try and figure this out. I begged them for one last try, to please call my dad. If anyone could make sense of this, it would be him. I gave him my dad's information, his name and number, the whole 9 yards. They pulled over, called him and told him everything. I could hear my dad yelling. He definitely wasn't happy, and he too thought this was nothing but a sick joke. He screamed, "I have no idea who this guy is or how he knows me. The only son I ever had, my ex miscarried over 30 years ago. I suffered with that loss daily, and this is just sick and twisted." There were a few choice words thrown in as well before he hung up on the officer. So I sit here now, as nothing more than John Doe. I'm not writing this thinking anyone will believe me, because no one else has. I'm writing in the hopes that the right person will hear this and know who I am and how it happened. I received a murder threat by phone once and was followed by a black Cadillac wandering around by my house, only to stop later near me, followed by a guy with a machete walking in front of my house, trying to see if anyone was there. By the time the black Cadillac parked a few blocks away, I went over to my neighbor's house. They were the ones who called the cops, while I called my parents, as I was home alone at the time, and could barely talk since I was on the edge of crying the whole time. Nope, just some random guy trying to get money or whatever. It took me a few years to get over that. I live in a really small rural area, but I don't drive, which can sometimes be a real pain. Occasionally, if I can't get a lift from a friend or a taxi, I hitchhike to the nearby towns, about a 10-minute drive either way. This has never been an issue, as I usually end up finding out the driver knows my parents, either through their work or because both sides of my family are from the area, and everyone pretty much knows everyone. So one day I finish work and can't get a lift home, and decide to hitch, and pretty quickly a car stops. It's on the main road and there are quite a few cars behind the one that stopped for me, so the guy driving pulls off pretty fast. I buckle my seatbelt and say, "Thank you so much," and the driver, who's around his mid-50s maybe, responds with, "Why are you thanking me?" But before I can answer, he says, "I'm not a rapist," and begins to laugh. I'm horrified, but laugh nervously along with him, wondering if maybe he just has a dark sense of humor, which is fine, but this was definitely not an appropriate situation. I put my hand into my pocket and flip my penknife open just in case, but he begins talking casually about the weather, asking me where I'm going, and the rest of the drive goes pretty normally until we reach my village. I say to him, "Anywhere along this road is fine to drop me off." He pulls the car off the road really quickly, and he suddenly seems extremely angry and just yells, "Get out my car." So I politely thank him for the lift, because that's just how I am, and almost fall out the door trying to get out as quickly as possible. Still to this day, I'm not sure if he was serious or not. If maybe he had some kind of mental health issue that would explain his rapid-fire mood swing, or even perhaps he was just trying to scare a young woman out of doing something as dangerous as hitchhiking. I still hitch, but a lot less liberally than I used to. So to the strange man with the creepy intention, let's not meet again. 15 years ago, my family and I were living in Madagascar, where people are pretty superstitious and always have a lot of great ghost stories. We lived in a huge and old house on the site where my parents worked. The kind with really thick walls and long corridors. We learned rather quickly that this used to be the director's house from long ago, where his wife had died from the plague or something like that. The story always varied depending on who was telling it, but everyone was positive the house was haunted. Generally speaking, the house was indeed scary. The basement was really dark and low, and there are rooms within the basement that were even darker and had white stains above the doorway shaped like skulls. The attic was kind of fun and scary, really goosebumps-looky, dusty and huge, and it covered the whole house. But there was a little dark room in there with no window, and I could just feel that I shouldn't go in. It was deep, very clear, an uneasy feeling in my stomach that I didn't want to go in there, but it was almost drawing me in, like something terrible but fascinating. The corridors were really long, so the walks at night to go to the bathroom were always terrifying. The bathroom was just in front of the stairs that climbed up into the attic, and I was always paralyzed with fear when passing it. We also did experience a few strange things. Several times my mum was home alone and saw movement behind her. Some of the windows were probably as old as the house itself, so the glass was uneven and would never give a clear reflection. It was probably nothing, right? When my brother was 9, he woke up and felt and heard someone crying over him. He said he could feel the tears, but he wasn't scared because he knew the person was nice, but simply sad. When I was 12, I felt more than once that someone was sitting on the end of my bed. I would stay paralyzed in fear, so I never dared look up. I could also hear footsteps above my room from the attic. My parents, hardcore scientists, said it was probably rats or an owl, but I was never convinced. It clearly sounded like steps. We stayed there for 5 years, and the weird stuff never stopped. Nothing truly horrifying happened, just the constant feeling of dread and unease. We're all on the science side, so not really superstitious, and try to look for reasonable explanations, but maybe the stories and the appearances of the house did get to us in our imagination. In any case, we moved out and have never experienced anything remotely like that since. I have a few haunted house stories to share. My late mother firmly believed my childhood house was haunted. Apparently, before I was born and my parents bought the house, there was a fire in the attic that caused a teen boy to die from smoke inhalation in his sleep. This is why my parents got the house for a good price. Growing up, my mum claimed to be sensitive, and though I dismissed her a lot, there are still a few things I can't explain. My mum had a small knick-knack table in the living room. Once, rounding a corner, she lightly touched a snow globe on the table absent-mindedly, and the snow globe exploded. Not broke, not fell, not cracked, exploded. There were tiny shards of glass all over the carpet. I saw the whole thing happen as I was sitting in the room, and my mum and I instantly locked eyes. While one of these incidents are probably just human error, one time sticks out. We were sitting on the couch watching TV, flicking between 2 channels to avoid commercials, when suddenly the remote was gone. We tore the house apart for almost 2 hours and found it in the back of the bottom cupboard behind the garbage can. One we rarely use. We always joked that we had a poltergeist hiding the TV remote on us. One time there were no indoor cats and I was sleeping. I distinctly felt cat paws climbing up my leg and settling down. I was half asleep and didn't even think about not having a cat at the time. Only in the morning did I realize, because it felt real, as any earthly sensation. There were also light bulbs shattering and flicking and popping when my mother was nearby. Probably a coincidence most of the time, but it got to the point where my dad kept backups in plenty, and it was somehow always her that it happened around. This also became a family joke, to the point where my mum would wiggle her fingers at us and swear she was a witch. In the attic we also heard noises. There were the usual moans and groans a house will make, but the sound of feet climbing a metal ladder are very specific sounds that would happen on odd occasions at 3 a.m. My dad would be on night shift and my mum slept on the main floor, so in my tiny bungalow it was pretty obvious who was where. The door to my room was under the ladder to the attic, and I used to jump the 3 steps in a hurry because I always got the creepiest feeling under the ladder. Some nights I slept with my mum until I was 17 if I heard the noise. My mum claimed she saw things, but I never did, so I can't confirm anything. She has since passed and promised that she would always haunt me. So far, no sign of her, so I'm a little disappointed. Still waiting for you to hide the remote on me, Mum. My husband and I moved into a new house last year. COVID really did us dirty, and various less than ideal scenarios meant our savings took a huge hit. So we made the decision to move outside of the city. Cheaper rent, bigger space, a garden for the first time, all the good stuff. Since we moved in, there has been a really weird feeling, and I believe that, looking back, I have experienced a few odd things already. I have overlooked and tried to rationalize them away. The only thing I can't deny, though, happened earlier this week. I am still working from home while my husband is back in the office, so I am at home most of the day on my own. I have gotten used to this new routine over time, and honestly I'm pretty happy with working at home and the peace and quiet. It allows me to get other things done around the house during my breaks, and cutting out the commute has been a godsend, especially now that we're outside the city. Because of this new routine, I've gotten used to having a new sixth sense around timings of the day and when I can expect my husband to come home, usually around 7:30. The night this happened, I clocked off work early and decided to take a shower since it was hair wash day. Thick hair, friends, know how much prep this takes. My husband often comes home when I'm showering and usually announces himself as to not scare me. For a bit of context, our house is super old, English terraced, which means it's long and thin and tall. When we moved in, the landlord had just renovated the bathroom that's located right at the top of the stairs by adding a new freestanding shower ensuite. Basically, if you're standing in the shower with the door open, you can look right down the stairs and down the hallway with a clear view of the front door. When I'm home alone, I often shower with the door open to mitigate the scare I will inevitably get when my husband comes home and bumbles up the stairs. When my husband gets home, he always announces himself as he comes through the front door, usually something along the lines of, "It's just me." From the bathroom to the angle of the stairs means I can only see to the knees of whoever's standing directly at the front door. My husband knows this and always bends down so that he can wave his hands up the stairs. If he hears the shower, that is. So while I'm standing in the shower listening to the rattle of keys in the front door, I become consciously aware that it's much too early for him to be home yet, since I'd clocked off work early and it was only 4:30. While I'm freaking out and staring wide-eyed down the stairs, my husband comes through the door. I see his feet, with his familiar grey suit and dress shoes. He announces himself in his distinctive deep voice and bends down to wave. I see his hand angled up and a quick flash at the top of his blonde hair. Relief. He must be home early. Only he wasn't home early. After I relax, I look away to finish shampooing, and after about a minute later, when I noticed that I'd never heard the front door close, and that I never heard the sound of his heavy feet on the wooden floor, or the loud thump of him dropping his work backpack on the floor before going into the kitchen. I peeked back down the stairs and everything was as I'd left it before showering. No bag, no work shoes, nothing. Everything was normal, except that my husband hadn't come home, despite the fact I'd seen him do it. Naturally, I freaked. Even though I checked the door and it was locked internally, I still went through the whole house with a kitchen knife in case, yet nothing was out of place. I sat on the sofa in silence for about 2 hours before he finally arrived home and went through his routine. The very routine that I'd already seen him do that evening. I never told him about this, and the other goings-on that I've remembered with the gift of hindsight. I know he wouldn't believe me. He's as skeptical as they come, and I don't want him to freak out that I'm suddenly seeing things. Growing up, my mum was a bartender. She was a single parent, so I took care of my little brother most nights. One night while I was making dinner, I kept hearing a strange whistling sound, but I didn't think too much of it, because it was storming pretty hard outside. But the whistling sound continued, and it started to sound more like a melody than whistling from a storm. I started to get a little freaked out, and asking my little brother if he was hearing it too. He wasn't. Eventually the whistling stops, but it's still storming pretty badly. Fast forward to the end of the night, when I'm going to bed. I'm climbing the ladder out of my bunk bed, and my TV shuts off. I think maybe the power went out, but the hallway light is still on. I try to turn it back on and nothing happens. So I reach around my TV stand and realize that it's been unplugged. At the same time I hear the whistling, only this time it's not in the distance. It sounded like someone was whistling directly into my ear. I could almost feel their breath. It sent chills down my spine. It still sends chills down my spine. At that moment I took off running out of the house screaming. We lived in an apartment with 3 other units, so I woke the neighbors above us. They were a younger couple with 2 kids and offered to come check out the house. I could tell at the time the guy thought I was just a stupid kid hearing things, but was trying to make me feel better. My brother and I waited outside of our apartment while he went inside to check it out for us. After a few minutes he came back. He seemed a little agitated and asked if we were playing a prank on him. This really scared me, and I told him we weren't. He could probably see we were telling the truth by our faces, because I could see the fear roll over his. He said he looked everywhere but didn't find anyone, but was convinced someone was in our home. They invited us to stay in their apartment until my mum returned from work, because they didn't feel comfortable with us staying alone. I never heard the whistling again, but so many other strange things happened to my brother and I in that apartment. I'm convinced it was haunted. Christmas Eve dinner at Burger King. Sounds innocent enough, right? Not my first choice, but I had to work late, and being Christmas Eve, it looked to be my best choice. I got finished working at 9 and had some coupons for Burger King, so that made my decision for me. When I got to Burger King, I noticed it was still open, but the dining room was shut down. The only way I could get something is if I went through the drive-thru. Only problem is I don't have a car. I tried to walk up to the drive-thru and place my order, but the compassionate young lady working the drive-thru wasn't having it. She told me if I didn't have a vehicle, I couldn't use the drive-thru. I became rather aggravated and began saying things I'm not proud of. At that moment, an older woman wearing shining armor appeared on the scene and offered me to jump into her car and order my food. At first, I turned her down, not wanting to be a bother, but after some convincing, I decided to accept her help. And after ordering my food, it took so long to get it that I missed my bus and got upset. So the nice woman offered me a ride home, and I kind of felt off-put by the offer and declined. She was persistent, but at the same time nice, and convinced me to take her offer. Mind you, I am a 250-pound 30-year-old man and really didn't feel that threatened by a 50-year-old woman. If the circumstances were different, I would have not taken the ride. After I told her where I lived, we proceeded home. About 5 minutes from my house, she made a wrong turn. I explained that I lived the other way and that we needed to turn around or let me out here, and I could walk the rest of the way. It was then that the woman's demeanor changed, and she told me that she could not let me spend Christmas Eve alone and that she was taking me to her house. I told her I needed to get home immediately to let my dog out and that I would be fine. The woman then tried to entice me with cocaine and liquor at her place, but since I'm in recovery, I told her I wasn't interested. She refused to turn around or let me out, and started to drive strangely, not stopping at stop signs, and I'm not gonna lie, my mind was racing and I began to sweat. I knew that I could physically overpower this woman, but what awaited me at her house? I also felt bad about hurting her after all her kindness, but I had to get away before her house, and I didn't know where that was, so I didn't have much time to find out. Then all of a sudden, luckily, the car in front was stopped at a stop sign, and across from it was another stopped also. She had to slow down, almost at a stop at this point, to where I made my break, jumping out of the car, still moving, and leaving my food in the car and taking off running. As I was running, she stopped, got out of the car, and began to try and talk to me into getting back in with her. That just wasn't an option. I didn't know what her motives were or who she was, but I knew I wasn't willing to risk my life over it. I ran all the way home and made sure I wasn't followed. What would have happened to me if it was 2 years earlier and I was still doing drugs and drinking? Her offer of cocaine and booze would have probably worked. Kidnapping, murder, sex trafficking, organ trading, or something else. Being a man, the thought of the vulnerability most women face every day was so foreign to me that I now understand the fear most women face. I really feel this nice woman had a nefarious purpose. Thinking about it, the ruse of such a non-threatening bait would be perfect to lower the guard of a prospective victim. Any thoughts would be appreciated. I never went to the cops because I thought they might not believe me or look down on me for being scared in this situation. What if, by not reporting this, someone else ends up hurt? Or whatever didn't happen to me happened to them? When I was about 10, I watched my mum's purse slide from the kitchen counter, hover in mid-air for about 15 seconds and then slam to the ground. I can't say I remember running, as it doesn't seem like my feet touched the ground. When I found my mum outside, all I could manage was, "Mum, your purse, it fell," and a dead stare. All she replied was with, "Pick it up then, please," as she shook her head. In this same apartment to this day, as my mother still lives there, a ghost, or whatever you want to call it, drops and rolls what sounds like marbles on the ceiling. Sometimes it sounds like bowling balls, others golf. They drop from a good height, it bounces and rolls, as you would expect them to on a hard linoleum floor covering solid concrete. After a quick search online now, the likely culprit is actually water moving in the pipes, apparently. I would totally jump over any explanation, to be honest. Except I have yet to hear one that explains why the hell it would follow you around from room to room, even while running down the hall to leave the apartment. I used to call the ghost Charlie, after my imaginary friend from kindergarten. Then we found out that several others would hear this anomaly, and we changed the name to Mason, as in masonry, due to the fact that he lived in the cement of the building. The building manager and the HUD had gotten numerous complaints about the issue, just pointing out that my mother and I are not the only ones, and we're convinced a ghost child is responsible. When I was still 14, I decided to sleep at the sister of my grandma's house with my cousin. They were living in a house where my grandfather exactly died due to a heart attack, and I was really creeped out whenever I thought about it, especially that there were pictures hanging on the walls, usually pictures of my other relatives who'd already passed. I suddenly awoke at 4 a.m. because I needed to pee. My grandmother tried to convince me that I should pee in the arenola, also known as a chamber pot, but in the Philippines we call it arenola. It is used whenever you need to go but can't be asked to use the bathroom. In that case I refused because I didn't want to pee there, so I just had to go outside. Before I could get to the bathroom, there's a mini hallway, and at the right side there's a door that would lead me outside. When I knew that was open, I was okay with it, until I saw a woman wearing a white dress floating beside a tree in front of me. I had to look at it closely as I blinked a few times, making sure if I was actually seeing it. She also had really long hair, and I couldn't even see her face. I got really scared because it's like she was walking or floating towards me. I nipped into the bathroom quickly and did my thing. I didn't close the bathroom door fully since I planned to run out as quickly as I could after. I even managed to flush the toilet, even though I was petrified at what I saw. And after turning the lights off, I ran through the hallway and never looked back. After that encounter, I couldn't sleep. It was creepy as well, since there were numerous statues of saints hanging out on the top of their drawer. I felt like they were watching me closely, and it really didn't help me sleep. I never slept at their house again after that. I was 14 in the year 2007. It was the fall semester of my grade 9 year. I was so excited to finish the semester, as I had a Christmas vacation to look forward to during the break. It was all I thought about. I didn't have much to look forward to in life at the time, as I'm a very shy kid who didn't have many friends, and my high school experience was only just beginning, so I didn't have many opportunities to engage with my peers in a meaningful way. So being the shy kid, I just fantasized about this vacation all day, every day. December finally comes, and it's time to go to Florida. My immediate family and I gathered all of our aunts, uncles, and cousins to take part in a huge drive from Windsor, Ontario to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where about 25 to 30 of my relatives rented a massive, and I mean massive, beach home to stay in for our week-long vacation. The drive was approximately 2 days long, and we stopped to sleep in between. But I didn't mind. I wanted to get there. I didn't care how long it took. We arrived at the house and the fun ensued immediately. We played games, watched movies, swam in the pool, joked and laughed. It was a great time. It was the week going into 2008 New Year, so that was just another thing to celebrate. My family is loud and rambunctious, so this energy was welcomed for my shy self. Now, this is where the thing happened. I was sharing a room with my younger cousin James. When he and I were not playing video games in our room late at night together, we would tell stories, talk about life, and get excited for the adventures to come on our vacation. We headed to bed this night and fell asleep just fine. But in the middle of the night, I wake up groggy, tired, and sort of confused. I heard my cousin James rustling around in his bed and get up in a hurry. I didn't think much of it besides how frantically he opened the door and ran into the hall. The hall light was on, and everyone was awake. Weird. It wasn't New Year's or anything. It wasn't like he was running to see the ball drop. What was weird was that he was saying there was a huge noise coming from the entire house blaring on the smoke alarm. I didn't hear it at all, so this confused me. I get up and meet my sister Megan and my other cousin Catherine standing on the balcony worried and scared about the noise blaring through the whole house in the middle of the night. All of them were so scared. But I couldn't hear a sound. Not at all. I was standing next to my cousins and sisters asking what was going on, telling them I couldn't hear it. They looked shocked. I yelled down to my dad and uncles, who were shuffling in a panic trying to turn off the blaring sound, and I asked what's going on. "Don't you hear the sound?" "No," I reply. I couldn't understand the commotion. I almost floated back to bed, like a listless walk without any life, and curled back to sleep. Perhaps it was a dream. The next morning I asked everyone what happened, and they said, well, the smoke alarm tripped up. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, that wasn't a dream. Surely it had to be a dream because the frightening panic that was felt by everyone being disturbed by the sound, and I didn't hear a thing, yet I was there. Wasn't I? I asked my dad, and he said that I actually never was, that I never woke up from my sleep. He said I slept through the whole thing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was there. I asked questions about the sound, I said. To this day, my family still claims, my entire family, that I was not awake during the ordeal when they were fumbling around to turn off the alarm. It still confuses me to this day, and I spent the rest of the trip in a confused state trying to put the pieces together. But I just couldn't. Did I actually sleep through it? But it felt so real. I remember getting up and asking what all the ruckus was about, asking my dad about the sound, but no one said I was awake. Was I astral projecting? Was that why I couldn't hear the sound? Or was it a glitch? Perhaps I'll never know. My mum's best friend came for a visit. Her friend also brought her boyfriend too. He was weird, something was off about him. A week later, my mum's friend dumped him. He was so enraged, he brutally murdered her. When they were searching for her killer, my mum tipped them off that he was the one that did it. She was sure it was him. Came to find out, my mum unknowingly spent some time alone with her best friend's murderer in our house. I am a 29-year-old non-binary person. I'm an autistic introvert and hate being touched. When this happened, I was 20. I grew up in a small town in southwest Ohio. I had just gotten back from my uncle's house in Oklahoma. I have horror stories about him too, but I digress. I was on meetme.com before it was myyearbook.com, and that was before Facebook but after MySpace. Well, I was kinda lonely, so I just started surfing to see who caught my eye. I got a message from this dude on the Meet Me app, and we hit it off online. It took me about a month before I actually decided to meet him. He messaged me once a day and asked if we could meet. After I gave it a bit of thought, I agreed. My problem is that I neither had my license or a car, so my only other option besides walking was riding my brother's bike. I went through my contacts and even asked my dad. All of my attempts were met with a no, even though I had $10 on me for gas. So as I was on my way to his house, stupid I know, I was about halfway there when I got the shock of my life. I was riding on the side of the main road going through town. I hit a sewer drain, and somehow my front tire got lodged in the sewer grates and sent me flying over the handlebars. Luckily, there weren't any oncoming cars in my lane at the time, but the folks at the Fritch Big Boys across the street and the passing drivers all got a good laugh. I, however, did not. Well, he turned out to be a jerk because he had a car but refused to drive me home, when I offered gas money especially. Then suddenly his car had all these problems. Before I left, I asked my friend to pick me up from his house when I called from his Wi-Fi, as I was broke and couldn't pay for my phone service. Keep this in mind. This story is not about my ex. I was about to call my friend. I called once. There was no answer, so I called again. I called the third time and she finally answered only to tell me that she was busy, to wait an hour and then she would get me. I waited the entire hour, uncomfortable because his behavior towards me was going somewhere I didn't want it to. As his behavior was starting to get more erratic and threatening, I said that it was about time I leave because it was getting dark. He begged me to stay, and I called said friend again, hoping she'd say she was on her way, but the answer never came. So I decided to start walking. I was devastated. I knew the walk was going to be long and difficult and couldn't ride the bike, and decided that it would be best to leave my brother's bike behind. Well, about 13 miles into my walk home, I checked my phone to see what time it was. 7:30 p.m. It was getting dark when this black Ford F-150 stops and asks me if I want to ride. He seemed nice, but I'm naive at times and often miss red flags even though they're smacking me in the face. When I agreed to get in the truck, I noticed a tire iron on the floorboard. He was heavyset, short black hair, thin framed glasses and moustache. He wore a grey shirt and blue jeans and brown boots. He started with the typical questions like, "What's your name? How old are you?" And then he asked if I was single. I replied matter-of-factly that I was just walking home from my then-boyfriend's house. We got about 4.5 miles from my place, where my family lived, when he went on a rant about how women nowadays are so easy to give it out. He reached over and reached into my spaghetti-strapped shirt under my bra and grabbed my breast and started rubbing it. I froze. He stopped and then went into my sweatpants. At this point, I'm trying to come up with a way to get away from this man, and then I remember the tire iron that was by my feet. I asked if I could smoke a cigarette. He said I could, so I set my backpack down between my legs on the floorboard and made it look like I was looking for some. The backpack was slightly on top of the tire iron, and I grabbed it and said that if you don't stop the truck, I'll make us wreck. He still didn't stop. I was thoroughly pooping myself at this point, and I swung my arm back and busted his back window out and screamed at him to stop the truck. He was screaming and cussing me out and calling me all sorts of colourful terms, and he slammed on the brakes, and I hopped out of the truck and ran behind it to the left side of the road. Again, more stupidity. Where we stopped was part of a national reserve that I happened to know quite well. You might be asking yourself, why didn't you run the other way? Well, on that side of the road was a bit of fenced-in land and the gate was always locked. Anyway, I'm in the woods heading towards my family's house. I knew if I didn't get home soon it was going to get dark and I'd be lost in the woods. I wasn't much bigger than I am now, and I was sweating heavily, so I needed a few breaks. My heart was pounding so hard and it was hard to catch my breath. I swore. Every noise I heard was me thinking he was about to grab me. I made it home in about an hour of trekking through the woods. I told my family what happened and they just shrugged it off. It made me feel very invalidated. My family has never been a source of comfort or safety, just another reason why I don't trust anyone. When I calmed down and cooled off, I decided to go confront the so-called friend, and looked in the parking lot for her van. She was home. I knocked on her door and confronted her, and she finally came clean. She said she was home the whole time, and I told her what happened and she just didn't care. I was hurt and angry with everyone in my life at that point, and I haven't spoken to her since. So to my so-called friend and the dirty old man, I hope I'll never see you again. A few years ago, we moved into our house that was first built in 1941. The garage had been plastered with tons of conventional brochures and airline tickets for this guy named Ray. They were all from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Not after moving in, I was alone in the house and walked into my bedroom when, clear as day, someone whispered in my ear, "I'm not ready yet." Yeah, creep out central. I'm pretty sure that was Ray, and I've since decided he's pretty harmless. I occasionally hear someone moving around when there's no one else home. The cat is always staring at something invisible, and my daughter has occasionally told me there was someone in her room when there wasn't. Stuff doesn't move around when he doesn't seem so angry, so we just laugh about it and talk to him. By nature, I am a jumpy person, and even hearing a floorboard creak causes me to jump out of my skin. I'm here to share a story. To provide some background, I used to work at a Victorian mansion in my hometown during my senior year of high school up until I left for my first year of university. I was a tour guide there, and because of this I was kind of allowed to just explore the home during my free time between tours. This mansion, which is known for its eccentric owner and is apparently haunted according to local urban legend, is big. Big isn't really the right word to describe it. As a home, it's huge. Its layout is confusing, which lends itself to the overall creepy vibe that the house just gives off. The house is allegedly haunted by its owner, and I'm happy to confirm or deny which house it is if people would like that sort of thing, as it's a well-known tourist attraction from where I'm from. There's a certain time of year running from June to mid-July where the house is generally more active. It is generally accepted by tour guides, as we were the ones spending the most time in the house out of all of the employees. But there are far more sightings and paranormal experiences that would occur during this time of year. Our running theory is that these weeks were the time in which the owner's daughter had been alive, before dying 6 weeks after birth. The death was what really started the owner's spiral into what many would consider to be hysteria or craziness. This happened in late July of 2018, if I remember right. It had been a slow day, especially slow for the summer months, where waves of tourists would come tour the home. During slower times, tour guides are sent to the home to clean, generally dusting, washing windows or sweeping, simple tasks to help maintain the house. I, along with one of my co-workers, was cleaning in the owner's main bedroom. Us tour guides would refer to this room as the dead room, as this was in fact the room that the owner died in. This wasn't something we would use around guests, as this would probably freak out the ones that weren't fans of paranormal activity, as we had lots of guests that were fascinated with the architecture, or were just there because Yelp said it was a fun tour. At this time, my co-worker was fairly new to the job, and seeing that I was one of the more senior tour guides with a year underneath my belt, I was pointing out things in the room to her. One thing in particular that I pointed out was a scent sachet that was placed in a period picture on the bedside table. It was supposed to have a floral scent of some kind, but was not particularly strong, so most guests likely wouldn't be able to notice any difference it could possibly make. After doing so, I decided to actually do my job and clean. I was dusting the window frames and my co-worker was inspecting the chest of drawers. For reference, This is across the room from where I pointed out the scent sachet to her just minutes before. While she was seeing if the various drawers in this antique piece of furniture would open, she noticed that the scent sachet would possibly be more effective on this side of the room, as this was the side of the room where guests would enter on the tour. There were 4 drawers on each side of the chest of drawers, and she finally got to the bottom one. And at the time we were about 3 or 4 feet apart, our backs to each other, and my co-worker said in passing, "I'm sorry, Mom," to the home's deceased owner, as there was a possibility that this piece was original to the house. We are unsure, as all of the furniture was sold off shortly after the owner's death in private auction. As she stood up, there all of a sudden was a strong scent of roses, as if someone was shoving a bouquet right in your face, coming from right between where we were standing. I remember feeling this wave of panic immediately wash over me, as I turned to look at my co-worker and asked her if she smelt it too. She said yes, and that she was certain we weren't alone anymore. After a long second of us just looking at each other, the 2 of us bolted from the room, incredibly spooked by this very in-your-face moment, and I have no way to explain it since. And the smell of roses never fails to cause a shiver to run down my spine. When I was around 13 or 14, I had a dream that me and my mum were in Holland in a hotel to see my stepdad's daughter, and when they were checking into the hotel, I saw my mum, but in the dream I couldn't see my stepdad John. I mean, from the back it looked like him, but when he turned around there was someone else there when I woke up. A few weeks later, me, my mum and my stepdad John went to Holland to see his 2 daughters. So we checked into the hotel, bearing in mind I told no one about the dream because I didn't want people to think I was crazy. So we were checking into the hotel, and there I was standing. I saw everyone. It was exactly the same as my dream. I thought I saw John, my stepdad, but it wasn't him. And when the guy turned around, it was the same man from the dream. I got the biggest chills, and it was the most surreal feeling of my life. Me and my friend were at a Chinese restaurant. We ordered a General Tso chicken and a shrimp lo mein. When we sat down, we took out our boxes and set them on the table about 2 feet apart. My friend opened the first box and sees a shrimp lo mein dish. It had all the things in there: noodles, shrimp, fried rice. He closes it and opens the other box. Inside is another shrimp lo mein dish: shrimp, noodles, fried rice. Oh, I think they must have mixed the order. I was just about to say this when my friend says out loud, "Look, they made a mistake and gave us 2. He opens the first box again. Inside is a General Tso chicken dinner order. White rice, egg roll. He froze and looked at me, and I looked back at him. We sat there in silence. It took us 5 minutes or so to collect ourselves. Neither of us have any idea how the hell that happened. I was sitting in my living room watching TV, and my mum walks by, and I say, "Hey," and she just walked into her room. A few minutes later, she walks through the front door with groceries, as she had just gotten home from the store. Someone please tell me what the hell just happened. There's no way my mum was there 1 second and arrived later. I just can't get my head around it. I was around 15 to 16. My mum, stepdad, brother, and brother's girlfriend all went out to the local pub for maybe an hour before this happened. I was home alone with my twin. We're both female, and we had just been watching Mamma Mia. Classic. Right as the credits were on, we go and grab a snack from the kitchen, and I'm stood in the hallway when I hear a knock on the door. It must have been around 8 or 9, at the latest, so not even too late. Standing with his face pressed right against the window on the door is a 40-ish-year-old man. I freeze on the spot and watch as this guy tries opening the letterbox, and through it he bends down and says, "Hey little girls, let me in." I told my twin to get around the corner to the kitchen, and I noticed with absolute dread that the front door was not locked. I slowly made my way to the front door, taking slow steps and not breaking eye contact with the guy at all, and quickly put the chain on, as I did not have the key. At this point I ran back to my twin, and she was already on the phone with my mum. It was awful in that moment, as we were trying to whisper and tell them to come home, but she couldn't understand us at all. Soon enough she understood, and told my brother and stepdad, who were running back to us. Throughout this, the guy was still trying to talk to us through the letterbox, saying stuff like, "Please, let me in." And we were hiding around the corner with our dog and a knife. After about 5 to 10 minutes after hanging up, the pub isn't that far, I heard my brother and stepdad at the door, and they made sure we were okay, and told us they didn't see anyone at all. It could have been a drunk guy, but the horrible dread feeling just sank into me, and I knew this wasn't a good situation at all. I knew some of you may be shocked that I didn't call the police, but this was the first sketchy thing to happen to me, and it didn't spring to mind in that instance. This happened to me when I was 16, and on a site called Stickcam, which was a website chat site. Anyway, I ended up talking to some hackers on Ventrilo, and stupidly accepted a file from one of them. I don't remember what he said the file was, but I tell them I'm going to take a shower, and when I come back, my webcam light was on. I knew right away, and felt very stupid. At the very least, mine had a light. One night when I was around 12 or 13, my parents were gone for a while, and I was just staying up really late, past midnight on my desktop computer, waiting for them to return. Like most people, I had been told a million times not to speak to strangers on the internet, but about half my friends list on MSN were people I had never met before, so I was chatting to a bunch of them. When out of nowhere, one of my online friends had told me exactly what I had been doing the past hour or two, e.g. that I had been eating, drinking, playing with, when I had gotten up last, things I had never mentioned in my chat. I instantly get a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. My desktop was set up in front of a big window, so as far as I knew, this person I had been talking to, that was supposed to live in a different country to me, had found my address and had been watching me through the window. Turns out, he had somehow hacked into my webcam, which I always left plugged in even though I had been warned not to when I wasn't using it, and had been frequently watching me through it whenever he wanted. It's been 10 years, and I still have all the cameras on my devices covered in thick duct tape. My dad used to tell me and my brothers all sorts of stories from his youth hitchhiking down the East Coast. There are two that have always really stuck with me, and I figured you guys might like this. When my dad was 15, he left home in Massachusetts and hitchhiked down to Florida, where his older sister was living in Daytona. This event apparently happened on this trip somewhere in Virginia. He had been trying to hitch a ride outside of some city, though he could never remember which one. This happened in 1976, and there were a lot of drugs done between now and then, and this really nice car stopped and picked him up. He and the driver get talking, and the guy tells my dad that he's a surgeon at one of the local hospitals, gives him a business card, and tells him that if he ever needs anything at the hospital, just to give them his name. All is going well, and he is apparently heading pretty far south for some family function, so it's a long way that my dad doesn't have to walk. He seems like a nice professional guy, clean cut, well spoken, and then it starts to get weird. The doctor starts giving my dad a side eye, and seems like he wants to say something but can't quite figure out how to say it. Of course, my dad is just sort of ignoring him because, as he says, I had been on the road for a while and hadn't had a shower or changed my clothes in weeks. Then the guy finally comes out and says it. "Can I suck you off?" My dad was obviously taken aback by this and tells him, "No. Please, just a little." "No. I'll give you $50 if you let me do it." "No. How about if you just let me see it? Can I see it?" "No, I think you better let me off here." And surprisingly, the guy does. He pulls off at a rest stop and lets my dad out. Before he pulls away, he hands my dad that $50 and tells him, "Sorry about that, man. I hope I didn't blow your mind or anything. I know it isn't that creepy, but I thought you guys might like it." My dad always said the guy didn't seem like a bad guy, just really messed up, and honestly sorry to have freaked him out so bad. My story takes place in a small Scottish town, roughly situated between the larger cities of Edinburgh and Glasgow. For context, I'm a 42-year-old female. I'm a dentist by trade and have been for the last 19 years. I mention this only to demonstrate that I'm a fairly grounded and level-headed individual who will always strive to find any rational explanation for any unusual or surprising occurrences and situations in which I may find myself. I have, however, always believed that the energy that keeps each of us alive, some may refer to this as our souls, does not and cannot dissipate the moment our bodies cease to be alive. To quote one of the laws of physics, energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only converted from one form to another. The only way to use energy is to transform energy to one form to another. Hence, I believe that the energy which makes up that age-old mystery of life itself cannot just disappear once the body's vessel dies. Which begs the question, where does it go? Now, I apologize if this sounds a little preachy, but it's what I've always rationalized the concept of ghosts or spirits to myself as. And as it stands, I believe I've had a number of what can be referred to as paranormal encounters, many of which were experienced in my childhood home. I accept that many people would disagree, but I'm guessing if you're listening to this now, we're more than likely on the same page. So here's my tale, and I hope you enjoy it. But the story doesn't begin with me. My parents bought our house as a fixer-upper when they got married 44 years ago, built in 1888. However, as a newly married couple in the 1970s, it was only just affordable. Eventually, over time, and by investing a lot of hard work, my mum and dad provided my younger brother and I with a beautiful family home full of love and many happy memories. Some memories, however, I wouldn't exactly describe as happy, but I digress. On with the story. First, let me briefly describe the house's layout. It still contained many of the original period features. Beautiful high ceilings with ornate concealing around the edges. The living room and dining area had at one point been separated by a partitioning wall, which my dad had decided to knock through, resulting in one larger room with a sort of alcove feature. At the end of the downstairs hall was a huge solid wooden door with a gorgeous antique original frosted glass window adorned with images of flowers. This door opened into a small vestibule, beyond which was the large, heavy wooden front door. The staircase still retained the original wooden and wrought iron banister. The top 4 steps curved sharply to the left, leading onto a very small landing, which was not visible from the bottom of the staircase. The upper floors of our house were much smaller than the ground floor, especially after our parents extended the property out onto the sizable back garden. This may seem like a lot of information, but it is crucial to the story that I illustrate the layout and the fact that some changes to the original house design had taken place. At the top of the stairs, only 3 rooms existed: my bedroom, my brother's, and the family room. Now, this first tale isn't paranormal of nature, but I felt worth including it nonetheless. Shortly after they were married and had moved into our house, my parents were settled into bed when the front doorbell went. It was late and the house was situated in a very quiet street, which instantly put them on edge. Dad warned Mum to stay where she was, and as there was no peephole, he cautionedly opened the front door. On the lawn, only a few feet away, was a man, lying sprawled out and apparently unconscious. Although this would have been the mid to late 70s, Dad was quite rightly very wary of the situation, and after calling out to the man several times to no avail, he proclaimed to my mum in a loud voice that she'd best call the police. However, rather than do so, they sat and waited for a few minutes before my dad anxiously checked the figure on the lawn again, and surprise, surprise, there wasn't a soul in sight. Had Dad gone out there, he suspected that there would have been a second or third party hidden out of sight, and they may have overcome and run into the house to do God knows what. Good old Dad. Now for some tales of the encounters with the paranormal. One day, a year or so into their marriage, my mother, who happened to be pregnant with me at the time, was looking out of the kitchen window when she saw the top of a small blonde head sauntering by the window. She found it strange that she hadn't heard anyone coming up the driveway at the side of the house, as it was lined with loose stones. Growing up, I distinctly remember that you could hear everyone coming up the driveway, even the odd wandering cat or bird. Dad had dark blonde brown hair, so she felt it wasn't him, but never doubted what she'd seen. Mum went out and checked the driveway, then went into the garden where my father was working on the flower beds. There was, and still is, only one way to enter the area from the side gate, so she was both alarmed and confused to find out that Dad hadn't a clue as to what she was on about, and hadn't seen anyone at all. Poor Mum blamed her hormones, yet she couldn't stop thinking about it. It was so vivid. She had seen someone for sure, and after discussing it at length with my dad, her sisters, her own mother, and well, anyone that would listen really, she eventually put it out of her head and got on with her day routines. Let me just tell you a little bit about my dear Mum. She's one of the most hard-working, kind and honest people I've ever met, and feel utterly blessed to have a mum who possesses such a temperament. She's modest to a fault, very moral. Nothing about her character is attention-seeking. She keeps herself to herself, believes that her business and affairs are her own, and never gets involved with idle gossip. She's absolutely the last person in the world to draw any unnecessary or unwanted attention to herself, and would gain nothing from inventing or embellishing a story, for any of the aforementioned reasons. Seriously, she hates attention. She hates telling this story, and she hates me telling it. So she's gonna love me for sharing it with all of you. A few weeks later, there was my mum happily getting on with housework, preparing for my imminent arrival, and she found herself cleaning out the bathroom upstairs. Then as she was vacuuming the floor, she moved out onto the landing. Remember that very small landing at the top of the curvy stairs? She glanced out behind her, actually dropped the vacuum in front, and I swear she says she nearly gave birth to me right then and there. Peering around the corner of the staircase was a young, very thin, and very pale boy with blonde hair and big, wide blue eyes, with a quizzical expression on his gaunt little face. His blanched, spindly fingers were curled around the wall at the top of the stairs, as if he were half hiding, half curious. Mum said it was like he was quietly trying to climb the stairs without being noticed. Naturally, Mum let out a yelp. She got such a shock that she dropped the vacuum. Slowly bending down to retrieve it, she completely locked eyes with the young, almost emaciated child who had suddenly appeared in her home. Who the hell was he? How had he gotten in? Was he ill? Lost? He looked a little frightened. Heart hammering, she stole a glance down towards the vacuum. Quickly she picked it up, and he was gone. Just like that. Gone. Terrified, and not to mention heavily pregnant, she peeked down the stairs. Nothing. He couldn't have gotten down all the stairs so quickly, she thought. Or so quietly. What the hell was going on? It only occurred to her later that the child of around 10 to 12 must have been the same one she'd seen walking past the kitchen a few weeks prior. Maybe she wasn't going mad. Mustering every ounce of courage, she briefly and tentatively checked the bathroom and 2 bedrooms, but the little boy had simply vanished. "Hello? Who are you?" Not a sound, apart from the TV downstairs where Dad was having lunch. Dad didn't quite know what to make of it. He believed her, though. You see, Dad had also had some experience with the supernatural. He worked for his father as an ironmonger in a town about 20 miles from our house. It was a very old listed building, a conservation building owned by the council. This meant that my grandfather rented the property. The shop had a ground floor where they sold tools, screws, hinges, and an upper floor which housed larger items for sale like lawnmowers. There was a door on the ground floor that opened into a room where they stored many different planks of wood and timber. They called it the timber room. This room had a door which opened out onto the street, but was long disused, locked for years, and inaccessible. This door used to be the door to an old apartment and blocked by the many pieces of timber being used and stored there. One other door at the back of the room remained locked that existed above the timber room. The apartment had been empty and derelict for years. One day Dad sat perched with his feet up in front of the door that linked the ground floor of the shop and the timber room. As he tucked into his sandwiches, an old man in an overcoat with a cap and white shopping bag in his hand walked past the door. He was actually inside the timber room, yet Dad hadn't seen him enter. In fact, he would have physically had to have moved out the way to let him in due to where he was standing. Now Dad thought this extremely weird and couldn't imagine how on earth this old geezer had gotten past him, but decided to allow the old guy to browse while Dad finished his lunch. He finished his sandwiches, had a quick gander at the newspaper and went into the timber room in a bid to assist the customer, who was nowhere to be seen. While Dad couldn't get his head round it, he even attempted to check the front and back doors of the room to no avail. They were totally hemmed in by large heavy planks of all different types of wood, not to mention they were locked. So he scratched his head and pondered for the next few hours, until Mary, one of the employees, came in for her afternoon shift. He relayed the story to her, and she gives him a wry smile. "Did he have a cap, overcoat and shopping bag?" she asked. Dad's jaw hit the floor. "Bloody hell, how'd you know about that?" "Oh, no worry, that's old Jock. Everyone knows about him. He's harmless, poor old soul. He used to live in the flat upstairs. Hanged himself up there a few years back. If you go to the flat, you can still see the rope hanging from the rafters." Well, you better believe that my dad spent the rest of the afternoon huffing and sweating and shifting plank boards of timber in front of that back door. My grandfather obviously had the key because he rented the space, but locating it wasn't easy. It was never used. After trying about 20 different ones, finally the lock clicked open. And when my dad gingerly climbed those stairs into the musty, bird-crap-caked ruins of the old apartment, there was indeed a solitary rope dangling from the ceiling. After Mum witnessed the little boy in the house that day, she didn't exactly see him again, but she felt him, or something like that. Often she'd feel eyes on her and fully expect to whirl around and be greeted with the sight of the waif-like blonde boy with the big blue eyes. Dad even claimed to feel and sense things, although I don't dispute that some of his experiences could have been attributed to some kind of mass hysteria by the phenomenon. But anyway, on frequent occasions, Mum would hear a kid's voice as she lay in bed. Sometimes it would wake her up. On more than one occasion, she'd open her eyes, and in the dark, she'd see a childlike face hovering in front of her, which would then fade away. She'd feel pressure on the bed, like someone was sitting down or leaning on the mattress. I don't think she was ever truly scared, but definitely left her on edge. One time when I was a baby, I awoke crying in the night. My parents' bedroom was downstairs and mine up, so Mum got up and tended to me and tried to put me back to sleep. At this point my dad was awake. He was on his side of the bed facing the outside. I had quietened down, so naturally when Dad heard the footsteps enter his bedroom and the duvet cover pulled back, he felt the weight of something getting into bed. He assumed it was my mother coming back, when Dad turns around and sees a figure next to him for a split second, and at the same time he hears my mum shushing me back to sleep. Then the figure was gone, and there was no one else in the bed but him. Safe to say Dad did not get any sleep that night. So, were these occurrences and this activity ever explained? Well, partially. You see, when I was around 3 years old, our old neighbor from across the street introduced my mother to an old man by the name of Mr. Whitelaw. You see, he was actually born in our house. He was so excited and enthralled to see the old place again that he promptly and rather forwardly invited himself round for tea one day. I personally don't remember meeting him. I think I must have been in nursery. Mum said that after they had a cup of tea and a bite to eat, she showed him around the house. He marveled enthusiastically over all the changes and developments to the original layout, and expressed his utmost joy at seeing all the original features, pointing out each and every one that my mum and Dad had preserved, and that he remembered fondly from his childhood. Now, I mentioned before that my mother is a very private lady, but at this point she decided to seize her moment. There was a question that she needed to ask this man. It was now or never, and she had to know. Mr. Whitelaw, I hope you don't mind me asking, and you may think me very foolish, but do you know of anyone who died in this house? Mr. Whitelaw promptly stopped in his tracks and stared intently at my mother. Why do you ask that, my dear? He asked with a soft smile touching the corners of his mouth. Mum explained that she had seen a mysterious young boy on a few occasions in and around the property. What did he look like? Can you describe him to me? So, my mother described the young boy thin, very pale and gaunt, timid, of around 10 to 12, with big blue eyes and a beautiful blonde head. What happened next, my mother told me she'll never forget. Mr. Whitelaw's eyes took on a slight glassy look, and the soft smile slipped away slowly. Wistfully he said, "You've just described my brother James to an absolute T. He was ill, you know, died during a flu epidemic in the days of World War I. He was my older brother. I was only 3 or 4 when he died, but I still remember him clearly. He was actually aged around 13 or 14, but looked younger due to him being poorly most of his life. Oh, but he loved this house. He would play hide-and-seek with me on the stairs. Thank you, dear. Thank you for showing me around my childhood home and for all the happy memories." Sadly, Mr. Whitelaw passed away a few weeks later. My mum never saw James again, but growing up there were many strange occurrences in that big old house, too many to explain. But when a door would open randomly or we'd hear an odd noise, my family members and I got into the habit of saying, "Come in, James," or "Stop playing with the light switch, James," or even, "James, please stop running up and down the stairs." I don't recall ever being scared growing up in that house, but it was just something we were used to. There was a sort of atmosphere. Visitors would sometimes sense it, but it was never ominous. That is until I turned about 16 to 17 years old. I have a large extended family, and most weekends we had cousins and friends to stay overnight. But one of my younger cousins, although she enjoyed visiting us, would never stay. Refused point blank. And she would never go into my room unless she absolutely had to. One day my mother was visiting my aunt, that is my mum's sister, the mother of said cousin. Now growing up, this cousin claimed to see the spirits of dead people and used to complain that they'd keep her up all night. None of us ever made a big deal out of it because she didn't either. She just took it all in her stride. So my mum and aunt are talking, and the subject of James and ghosts and our haunted house come up. Mum conveys that she really feels that her and Dad's room is the center of the activity, and my cousin overhears and snorts and huffs, shaking her head and laughing. Both my mum and aunt stop talking and look at her questioningly. Bemused, "It's definitely not your room," she says to my mum. "It's Cheryl's room that's the problem, i.e., my room." Needless to say, no one told me this, because I was about to find out for myself. I'm just gonna have all the moments my entire family had at our old house. Some background. There was this river behind our house that was more of an irrigation canal than a river, but they had to block it off on both sides with a fence, because many people died in that river, which might explain everything that happened. I was around 4 to 6 when we lived in that house. Our cat was meowing at the door, and my father opened it up to find a completely crushed dead snake near our cat, like it was killed by a tire. So, when he came back with a big bag to pick it up, the snake sat up and hissed at him. The TV would also turn on completely by itself when no one was around. Our bathroom door could be blocked if someone opened a drawer, but the drawer would open up even though there was no one in the bathroom capable of opening it, as the door opened inwards. My older sister, who was between 8 and 12, had many freakouts because she kept seeing a woman in a red dress watching her. My older brother, between the ages of 6 and 10, swore he saw an old man in a suit. My ma and pa would also hear me and my younger brother talking to someone in our room over the baby monitor, and at first they didn't care because they thought it was my oldest brother just saying hello to his toddler siblings. Until one night my dad finally got pissed, and their door was right across from ours, so in one quick motion he got out of bed and swung it open to yell at our brother for not letting us sleep. And when he opened the door, my younger brother and I were the only ones in the room, staring into our closet and talking to it. On another occasion, I was downstairs watching TV. My baby brother was taking a nap, and I looked at the stairs, and there he was, staring at me. So I thought I'd be a good brother and get him back to bed, but as I went to get him, he ran up the stairs and I chased after. He ran into our room and closed the door, and just as I was about to open the door, 2 doors down, my baby brother comes out from the bathroom wearing a completely different set of pajamas. I think I was around 16-ish, and I was hanging out at a friend's house. It was normal for me to be over there hanging out, even if my friend and I weren't actually hanging out together. So I was wandering around the back of their house and I found a little door behind a set of hedges. Not like a tiny fairy door, but like a crawl space access square door. The funny thing was, it was not at ground level, but about 3 feet off the ground. I had been in this backyard before and been all over this house, and the door should not be there. If I went in, it would open up in the brick wall of the garage that had been converted into a small workshop room, and there was no door from the inside. Being a curious girl, I pried the door open and looked in. It was a dark and sealed up room. The floor, which looked like it was dirt, but there were a few pieces of furniture inside, against the far wall, which was the front of the house. A table/workbench which was set up with 2 chairs neatly tucked under it, and I also remembered a dresser, or an armory, turned around so the drawers faced the wall. There was also some cardboard boxes, and odds and ends scattered around, but everything had years of dust coating it. So with it being dark as coal, it was hard to tell what was what, but there was something written on the wall above the workbench. It was 2 words, and I'm certain the first word was jacket, and the second word was something that looked like free. I reached inside and felt for a light switch, but couldn't feel one, although I did see a bare bulb hanging down. I noticed my hands were covered in dust from the wall. I thought about it, and considered not crawling inside, as I lacked a flashlight, and wanted to tell someone so they could help me in. I left the door open and ran back inside to get my friend. He didn't believe me, but he still followed me outside. When we got to the backyard, I peeled back the hedge, and it was gone. The door just simply wasn't there anymore, and I knew exactly where it had been, but it refused to re-exist for me. My friend wandered back inside, and while I ran around the house a few more times looking everywhere for the damn portal, it never reappeared. But my hand still had the dust on it from reaching inside for the switch. But it was not the dirt that was outside. It was clearly different dust. I have no idea what I saw, but I'm glad I did not crawl inside now, as at the time it wasn't scary. But now, thinking back on it, it's terrifying to think about. I live in a cul-de-sac. My bedroom is on the second story. I woke up one night around 3 a.m. to go to the bathroom. I knew we were expecting a lot of snow, and I looked out the bedroom window to see the accumulation. It was deep, like higher than the curb. A white blanket across the cul-de-sac. I decided to get some water, so I walked downstairs, turned on the light, and went into the bathroom and got water. I was downstairs for maybe 4 minutes, went back to my bedroom, and all the lights were out again. I looked out at the snow one more time. Within 4 minutes, there were now fresh footsteps leading from my house, across the cul-de-sac, and disappearing behind my neighbor's house. Never did find out what that was about, but I try not to think about it. A few years ago I was home alone. My husband was traveling out of state. I put on the news on the Samsung Smart TV in the living room, set the remote on the coffee table, and went into the kitchen next room over to make dinner. After a few minutes I noticed I didn't hear the sound of the news anymore, and I thought maybe the signal went out or the TV timed out and shut itself off. I come back into the living room, and the TV screen is showing a picture of a couch in a living room. My living room. Takes me a minute to realize the camera has been activated, and it's showing a live video of the room. The remotes were still on the table, so no chance the dog accidentally stepped on them and pushed buttons or anything. A few days later, news broke out that the Samsung TVs had a hacking issue. I guess the real mystery is how often I was spied on before I put tape over that camera. I was once at a barn alone. I'm standing there grooming my horse, and out of nowhere, I feel all the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, and my fight or flight response kicks in. I turn around, and there's a guy I don't know standing in the doorway looking at me with a creepy smirk on his face. He introduces himself as the boyfriend of a woman who kept her horse at the farm and starts chatting and walking towards me. My normally very chill horse starts dancing around me nervously and moves to position himself between me and the man before the man can get to me. I noped out of there and literally got on my horse and galloped off into the woods. I 100% believe that man had very ill intentions. A number of years back, I was driving along a deserted stretch of highway with no cars around. I was feeling quite tired, getting near the point of falling asleep at the wheel, when I noticed something in my headlights ahead. It's a woman. I start to slow down my car. What is she doing out here at this time of night anyway? She had her thumb sticking out and was wearing jeans and a leather jacket, dark hair flowing down past her shoulders, but her face wasn't that visible. I roll down the window and ask if she needs a ride. She doesn't say anything, and I push the door open and she sits in the car. I start the car, check my mirror, and head away. I give her a good look. She hasn't really moved much, so I ask a few questions to break the ice. Where you heading? No reply. There was a deep, long silence between me asking the question and the reply that never came. I gave her another look. You okay? Again. She doesn't reply and doesn't look towards me either. Her eyes focused on the road ahead. I snap back to reality and look back at the windshield along the same stretch of highway. I don't try to force the conversation, but I did need to know where she wanted to go. My mind started racing. What if she's out to attack me? or hustle me or something like that. My concern grew. Just as I was thinking all these things, I turned to her to say something again. What, I can't remember, but as I twist my head to look her way, she's gone. My heart skips about 5 beats, and I twist my head frantically to the back seat of my car, and she's not there either. I slowly bring the car to a stop, look all around my car. Where the hell did she go? She had just been here a moment ago, and now she was gone. I decided to myself I must have been hallucinating. As I said earlier, I was quite tired, almost the verge of falling asleep at the wheel before I saw her. And as you can imagine, the adrenaline pumping through my system kept me awake for the remaining 2-hour drive until I made it home at 1 a.m. The story doesn't end there though. A number of years later, I'm meeting with some friends. We're having beers and a barbecue, and we're talking, when the subject of ghost stories comes up. One of my friends, Alan, is offhandedly mentioning that he knows someone who claims that the particular stretch of road that I was on is haunted by a hitchhiker. I didn't have the courage to fess up my story, but hearing that definitely validated my encounter with whatever the hell that was that night. I met my husband when I was 15. After a couple of years of flirting, hooking up at parties, etc., we began steadily dating when I was 17 and he 18. My parents loved him, and we were fairly liberal. They would allow him to stay over, but only if he slept in a made-up bed on the floor in my room. Very trusting, I know. However, one night, one of my female friends was staying too, so she and I slept in my bed, and my husband slept on the floor. We all drifted off, and I had just fallen into a deep sleep when I was jolted awake by my husband. He was sitting bolt upright and punching me in the back, frantically shouting that something or someone had grabbed his feet and hovered over his face. He felt like he was suffocating. Now I must state here that my guy is honestly one of the most sensible, composed and skeptical people I know. As a couple we are total opposites, and they do say opposites attract. Hence this uncharacteristic behavior of him really alarmed me. Fair enough, we'd probably been to the pub that night, and yes, there are people listening who will attribute this to sleep paralysis, but all I know for sure is that he was absolutely petrified, convinced that something had attacked him. He described waking up because he felt something grab at his feet and ankles, holding them down. Then he saw a dark figure bending over him, and felt he couldn't breathe. That's when he began to call on me, and finally sat up thrashing. The only way I could stop him from fleeing the house and walking the 2 miles home at 4 a.m. in the morning was to get down on the floor and hug him tightly. He held on to me like his life depended on it, and I swear, I thought his heart was going to burst out of his chest. I've been married to this man for 15 years now, and I've never seen him act like that since. It scared him crapless, and it scared me too. Next morning at breakfast, he described what had happened to my mum. She just stared back at him slack-jawed. "The same thing happened to me 2 nights ago," she said. A dark figure leaning over me. I had such a feeling of dread, and felt like I couldn't breathe or move. My husband also said that one night, after I'd had a party when my parents were away on holiday, he was sitting by himself in the living room, finishing his drink, and he witnessed a glass move across the table. Then he heard a noise like someone was flicking and pinging all the glasses in the room that was sitting out on the tabletops. My husband also grew up in a very old house, one much larger than ours. It even had an old servants' quarter area, and he witnessed a woman in a large grey bustling dress walk straight past him and through a wall. Recounting all of these experiences and writing them down has admittedly taken a lot longer than I originally thought it would. I do have other stories, but I'll save them for another time. But before I wrap this one up, I have one more event I'd like to share, and it relates to the seemingly ominous presence that inhabited our old house after young James had made himself scarce. One night when I was around 16 or 17, my parents attended a party at a neighbor's house. My younger brother was staying with cousins, and never one to miss an opportunity, I invited round 5 or 6 friends to play our guitars and have a bit of a jamming session. We were in mixed company, male and female. One of my female friends was upset because her boyfriend and her had broken up, so I suggested that she stay over for the night. She agreed, and as it approached about 11 p.m, the rest of the gang called for taxis, and one by one, I let them out the front door. Now, the staircase is at the front door, end of the hall, and the living room is at the opposite end. Our landline telephone, in the days where mobile phones weren't about, was on a small table in the hall, right next to the door to the living room. A potted houseplant sat next to the telephone table. My friend asked to use the telephone to let her folks know that she was staying over. And here's where something happened that affected me profoundly, so much that I'm sharing it with a bunch of strangers 25 years later. Just as my friend, still sobbing over the breakup, hung up the phone, an almighty bang came from upstairs, shaking the house slightly. Horrified, my friend began to panic. "It's okay," I laughed. "It's just one of the doors upstairs slamming shut. Someone must have opened a window. That can happen if there's a draft." I smiled at her and put my hand on her arm. She was still pretty upset. Then bang. Again, her eyes opened so wide I could see the whites all around her pupils. In fright, my fingers unintentionally dug into the flesh of her forearm. "Don't worry, it's just the other doors." But this time I wasn't so sure. There were only 3 doors upstairs. Remember the layout I described? Bathroom, bedroom, bathroom? Well, the thing that was bothering me was the fact that we didn't have twisty doorknobs upstairs. The 3 doorknobs had handles, you know, with long horizontal levers that you have to physically push down to open and close. And once the doors slammed, they were closed. Window draft or not, those doors would not open again unless the handles were pushed down. We were just getting organized to get settled into the living room and watch a film, when another bang happened, and my friend lost it. I tried to calm her down and told her it was okay. I said it was probably one of our mates who had perhaps stayed behind and were playing a really crappy joke on us. All the while I'm thinking, 3 slams. If I hear another, I'm going to lose my mind. Plus, I couldn't work out how a drafty window and ROM room could cause all 3 doors to slam. I didn't like this. This was my house. I was supposed to feel safe here. I wished my parents were home. My dad would know what to do. He always did. Heart pounding, I tentatively walked down the hall to the foot of the stairs and peered up into the darkness. Aye, very good. Who's the smart-ass, eh? Not funny, guys, not cool. You better come down right now, because if my folks find... And then it happened. As clear as day. I heard one of the doors from upstairs slam hard. Mentally trying to do the maths and work out how the hell there could have been another bang, my thought process was interrupted by the most guttural, loudest, menacing growl from the top of the staircase. My friend screamed. I jumped and noped right out of the hall and into the living room as fast as I could with my friend on my heels. We slammed the living room door shut, leaving on the hall light, staring at each other, breathing heavily, my friend in tears. We just asked ourselves over and over, what the hell just happened? I honestly don't know how long we were there for, but I practically had to beg my pal to stay with me, as she was truly terrified. I reckon it was about 45 minutes to an hour later that I decided to try and pull the landline phone into the living room, stretch the flex cord under the door. I knew it would reach. I'd seen my mum do it loads of times. And I honestly can't tell you how much I was totally crapping myself. And I opened that door into our hall. Shooting out, I grabbed the landline, tried desperately to unravel the flex and pull it into the living room. When I crap you not, another door got slammed, and a loud, raspy, sinister demonic growl emanated from the top of the stairs. I yanked the phone into the living room, got the cable caught on the houseplant, knocked it over, and spilled soil all over the carpet. But I didn't care. I wanted the door between myself and the hall space closed. When I finally managed it, I honestly could have wet myself with relief. My friend was wrecked by now. It was too late to call any of our friends. Their parents would go mad. So I decided to call the neighbor's house where my parents were spending the evening. But alas, no answer. They were clearly having a better night than us. So we sat there just freaking out for the next few hours. I went over it in my head. My brother had a few toys that made noises when you pressed them, but even then, they'd need to be activated to go off. At the end of the day, no matter which spin I put on it, in my heart of hearts I knew that what we'd heard was no bloody children's toy. Raiding my parents' drinking cabinet did help take the edge off. Call it Dutch courage, but when we could no longer keep our eyes open, I decided, stuff this, I want to go to bed. I crept to the bottom of the stairs, this time finding the courage to flick on the staircase light. Nothing. No sound apart from the whoosh of my heart in my ears. My friend was behind me, sticking to me like glue. Eventually we crept up the stairs, pausing on each step, listening intently, and braced, ready to bolt at a moment's notice. However, we reached the top unscathed, and I very bravely opened all the doors, as all three were indeed firmly closed over, and flicked on the lights. Then my friend and I scurried into bed and huddled close under the covers. We were still awake when my mum came in half an hour later, inquiring about the mess in the hall. I apologized and blurted everything out. Mum looked at us with sympathy and exasperation. "I'm going to have this house blessed," she stated, and then bid us goodnight. I don't recall if she ever did, but nothing as menacing as that ever happened again. Just the usual phenomena like faint voices and footsteps and odors. I did love that house where I grew up. In fact, my husband and I brought it from my parents when we got married, and neither of us have had an unpleasant experience after we moved in. We have since sold it, as we needed more space to accommodate our family and life, but occasionally I do miss it. I think it's because of where I grew up, and because of all the happy memories I have whilst living there, that it reminds me of my dad. We both used to sit in the corner of the living room and listen to his old 1970s Elton John vinyls. Regrettably and sadly, Dad passed away 4 years ago, and it still hurts every day. My children swear that they still hear his spirit walking around when they stay overnight with my mum, and my 8-year-old daughter is sure she heard him call her name. I do hope that's true. When I was 12, I moved into a house in the northern suburbs of Melbourne with my mum, brother, and sister. When we moved in, nothing out of the ordinary happened, until around a year and a half into our stay. Most of the incidents would happen to everyone else in the house, but nothing too significant would happen to me. I'll start with my experiences first. Whenever I was on the computer in my brother's room, at one side of the house, I would always hear footsteps from my mother's bedroom on the opposite side of the house. Always when I was home alone. I usually just shrugged it off as the neighbors walked around the house and the sound echoed into our house. Another time I had a friend over for a sleepover party on a Friday night. In the morning we were playing with wrestling figures in the play space between the drinking area and the living room. While playing, I saw from the corner of my eye this wispy kind of shape, like a human, walk behind me. When I looked, there was nothing there. My friend was facing me and said, "Did you see that?" "No," he said. One more thing that happened to me was when we were in the final week of moving house, we had a lot of boxes in the living room. One night, I was sleeping with my door open, and I could hear the boxes sliding around the floor and crashing into each other. My first initial thought was robbers were in the house. I turned over in bed to face the wall, then everything went dead, silent, and I was absolutely horrified. Now, more creepy things happened to my siblings and my mother. My mother used to hear a painting always fall off in the hallway, but it would fall and land upright leaning against the wall. At night, she had her closet open, and a coat hanger would often fly out the closet onto the floor. She once saw the imprint of someone sitting on her bed once, and she told me that when she was walking down the hallway, she felt as if someone was right behind her. My brother had a lot of weird things happen too. His room was located towards the back of the house next to the kitchen. At around 5 a.m. in the morning, he would hear the pots and pans moving around. He would ask my mother why her partner was up so early making noises. She would say, "He wasn't even here last night or this morning." Once when he had a friend over, they were in his room, when they saw, from under his door, the hallway light turn on. He thought someone was going to the toilet, as he saw a shadow under the door as if someone had walked past. I was not home at the time, neither was my sister, and my mother wouldn't have gone to the opposite side of the house because she had an ensuite of her own. He opened the door. No one was there. My sister's experiences seemed to be the most frightening though. My mother once told her to brush her teeth in her bathroom, so my sister walked into the room, then walked out, wide-eyed, and said to my mum, "There's someone sitting on your bed." My mother said she was terrified. I had to be brave and say, "I'll come with you, it's okay." Even creepier, my sister told me that she used to see an extremely tall black figure stand outside her doorway a couple of nights, and then some nights it was inside of her room. It would just stand there and look at her. When we finally moved, my mother said to the real estate agent that she thinks the house might have been haunted. But upon moving, she got in contact again with the agent, and apparently there have been no reports of hauntings at all. Yet. Or so she says. I used to work at a soup kitchen one day a week. This was about 10 years ago, and I still think about it from time to time. It's something I really loved doing, but had to stop because of health reasons. The place was run by a local church, and they had a group of regulars that worked there every day. Because of this, everyone had their own job or station that they worked every day. I was an outsider because I didn't go to church there, so I was basically just ended up doing wherever they put me for that specific day, and I did different things. So on this day, I was making and handing out tea. About halfway into the service, this middle-aged lady comes up in the middle and makes a beeline towards me. I've no idea who she is, but she looks very upset. Her eyes are wide, and she looks pale, and like she's about to cry. But before I open my mouth, she just says, "You look like my son." I was taken aback, but was like, "Oh, cool." She shook her head and said, "He died a month ago. You could literally be his twin, you look just like him." She was clearly very upset. I honestly felt I needed to apologize that she saw me today, but I didn't know how to go about doing it. She shook her head and started crying. "Almost had a heart attack when I saw you. I thought you were him. How old are you?" I told her I was 25. She shook her head again and said that he was 28, and that he died from a heart attack. I ended up apologizing and told her that I believed that everything happened for a reason, which I regretted saying because it was stupid, and I didn't know what else to say. She turned to walk away without taking any tea, but before she did, she looked back at me and said that God catches up to everyone eventually, and that he finally caught him. I think about that sometimes. I also tend to sleep very poorly, and often only sleep 2 or 3 hours at the most, so it means a lot of lights awake doing something or other than sleeping. A couple of years ago, I got into the habit of going out late to get something to eat and find a quiet place to sit and listen to stories on YouTube or the like. So that's what I was doing on this particular night. It was about 3 in the morning, and I was on my way back home, and ironically enough, I had been listening to Glitch in the Matrix stories. I live in a small town and rarely encounter another person when I'm out this late at night, and the roads are always empty. So I was on the highway, and there wasn't any other car near me. Suddenly, a bright yellow sports car comes roaring up behind me out of nowhere. Never did I see this car, and it was very conspicuous. bright yellow with green stripes down the sides, and it was just suddenly there. The car pulls around, and as it's passing me, I see a custom license plate. It just says glitch. I sat there with my mouth open and watched it drive into the distance. Never saw it since. We have 2 dogs and a cat. All 3 of them get fed early in the morning at the same time. Each one of them has their own dish with a specific plate that no one else uses. So one day Zoe's plate goes missing and we can't find it anywhere. It's not in the dishwasher, hidden behind or under anything, it's simply gone. Zoe is a 6-pound papillion, and this is a heavy glass plate, so she didn't just carry it off somewhere. We looked for this thing everywhere and couldn't find it, so we ended up just getting Zoe a new plate for her food. A few days later, that same plate goes missing also. No idea why, so we get a 3rd. This one didn't go missing. However, a few months down the road, I was getting dishes out of the cabinet for dinner, and there was Zoe's first plate. Now you have to understand that I get dishes from there every day, and I put dishes there every day as well. It had not been there earlier that day, or before. I couldn't have missed it. Her plate also never gets put up there, even after it's been washed, it just stays on the floor. The second one never showed up. No idea where that went. This happened to me a few years back, and is easily one of the most disturbing things that ever happened to me in my whole life. To give you context, I lived in a 2nd-floor apartment my junior year of college, and to save money, I opened my balcony doors and windows and kept the air conditioning off. This particular week, my 75-pound dog, with a terrifying bark, happened to be staying with my boyfriend, and I forgot to lock my door. Terrible coincidence, right? Anyway, I woke up in the middle of the night. I happened to sleep naked, and I'm in my bed. When I open my eyes groggily, I see nothing less than a man standing in my bedroom. I had no clue what to do. I couldn't jump up because I was naked, so instinctively I yelled, "Yo, what are you doing?" His response was, I came to shut your doors and windows. At which point I noticed all of them were shut. He left, and I locked my door and cried. When I was around 11 years old, I was home alone one day over the summer, enjoying a bag of Skittles and watching TV. I tossed a bunch of them in my mouth and made them into a sort of ball of deliciousness. Then something made me laugh and I ended up swallowing it. The ball wasn't huge, but it was big enough to get stuck in my throat and causing me to be unable to breathe. It was terrifying because no one was home to help me and I began to panic. I remembered some cartoon or TV show where characters were being choked and slammed their stomach into the air to get it to pop out. So I started throwing myself into the side of this recliner we had, and even though I probably wasn't doing it completely right, it actually worked, and the Skittle ball popped out. It was still one of the most terrifying minutes of my life, because I thought I was going to die, and very well could have. It's still one of my biggest fears about being alone, choking when I'm eating something too fast, and not being found until days later. In the summer of 2001, 2 close friends and I decided to take a hitchhiking trip around our home province of Ontario, Canada. We were out of school, had no jobs, and didn't have anything in our minds except good times and exploration. We were 3 18 to 19-year-old males looking to dry some of that wetness behind our ears. Amazingly, we got a straight ride from our hometown all the way to Toronto. I believe the only reason he picked us up is because my girl at the time had been with us to see us off. When he discovered she wasn't coming, he grudgingly told us to get in anyway. I was in the back seat with Jack, and my friends were called Jack and Charlie. Charlie falls asleep pretty fast in the front seat after the typical few minutes of warm-up chit-chat. After a while, the guy starts asking us creepy questions and saying creepy things. It's been 12 years, so I can't recall anything other than every half hour he would say, It's only a few hours till we get to Toronto, if you make it there. I just figured he was a bit freaked out with having 3 guys in the car. We get there, he dropped us off right in the middle of Jane Street by Finch. For anyone wondering, this is a place where people drop money on the ground and someone else will run up, pick it up, and literally spit drugs on the ground. It was quite something to see. We walked a good 16 blocks until we found a go bus to the suburbs, Brampton, and slept there for the night. We sure ran into a lot of characters and ended up in a few sketchy situations. I suppose that's all stuff for another day. The meat and potato of the stories lies in Guelph, Ontario. We had arrived in the late afternoon/early evening and decided to head downtown. We were near the church of Our Lady Immaculate, just enjoying the scenery when we were approached by a guy a few years older than us, in his mid-20s. He seemed like a normal dude. "Hey, you guys blaze?" "Yeah, man," one of my friends intones his lurch-like voice. "You rang? Wanna buy some?" he counters. Seeing as we had procured a little bit in Brampton, we turned him down, and he walked away about 100 feet or so, talking to someone else. Not 5 minutes later, a couple of guys in their mid-20s, muscular and rough-looking, walk up to us and ask if we have any buds to sell. We tell them we don't, but to talk to the guy over there, and he asked us if we wanted some. The 2 guys walked over to him, and we hear some yelling, and turn around to witness the 2 guys robbing the first guy who approached us. Sorry about that. We're thinking now is a good time to get scarce and end up slinking up the church steps and sleeping on the hill behind it. That's the bit I wanted to share. The whole trip was intersped with various incidents, including a 60-something-year-old trucker who smoked a bowl with us before planting his hand on my thigh. I wasn't having any of it though, and he was pretty respectful when I spoke up about it. I would be too, sharing a vehicle with 3 18 to 19-year-old guys traveling together. My wife told me this story. When she was in her teens, about 14 or 15, she and a few female friends were spending the night at her friend's house. They all went to bed around the same time. When they woke up, they were over a mile away from her friend's house in an orange groove laying on the ground. You're talking 5 teen girls, no drugs, no alcohol. Nobody could move them a mile away without waking them. None were known sleepwalkers either. My wife has always been a very light sleeper. I can't get her out of bed in the morning without waking her. Luckily, one of them had their phone on them and had to call for a ride. But here's what I find extra bizarre. My wife and her friends, that I have asked this about, and that she is still friends with, completely accept it as something funny and brush it off. This is not something you brush off as a random and inconsequential thing. Maybe it's a lie, but they were all dead serious about it. It's almost to the point like they were brainwashed about the incident. This line of reasoning is not normal for a person, especially if it's not something that happens regularly. I would lose my mind trying to figure out how I ended up there. There's no logical explanation for how 5 girls can go to sleep with parents home and end up over a mile away in an orange grove. To this day, it is the one thing about my wife I can't understand and subconsciously bugs me because I want to know the truth more than anything, whereas she, the person it happened to, couldn't care less. I don't think that's right. I used to live in an 110-year-old house in San Jose with a few buddies of mine. We'd hear stories from contractors that were preparing the house for renters after the old lady had gone senile and had been transferred to a nursing home. Things like footsteps upstairs when no one was home, and the electrician was in the basement. Hollow noises where noises shouldn't come from. Well, about 3 months after we moved in, we were startled by apparent heavy footsteps coming up the wooden stairs from the street. Thinking it was one of our roommates coming home early, we would open the door to greet him, but no one was ever there. I can't stress that enough. Yet, the best would come almost a year and a half later. I was splitting the front room with my friend, and late one night at about 3:30 a.m., I awoke to the right side of my futon depressing, and the wooden part of the futon creaking very loudly, as if an extreme weight had been set on it. This was compounded by the fact that my whole left side on the futon I had been sleeping on lifted in the air about 6 inches. Yeah, it was dead quiet, and all the hairs on my body went up as the air got noticeably colder. I was sleeping towards the wall for 2 very long minutes. I tried to get myself to face whatever it was that was causing my whole bed to raise up. Let me tell you, to even get that futon to creak, you'd have to jump up and down on it with significant weight. Just the way it was creaking sounded like 300 pounds were being focused on one point. Whatever it was dissipated into thin air as my bed slowly went back down again. I woke up to a depression on my right side of the futon, something that I also cannot stress enough would take a lot of weight to do, as it was a very firm futon mattress. It gets better. My roommate was awake the whole time and heard the exact same thing I did at the same time I told him it happened at. He never opened his eyes either, as he thought it was just me shifting the bed around. After this, it never happened again, but I could totally tell it was something in the house finally trying to connect with us, and it took all the energy it could in the room to get the point across. Even when I see the house today, it still freaks me out. I had an experience about 7 years ago. I was meeting up with a friend. He'd actually been an online friend for years that I met through gaming when I was a teen. He joined the military and ended up at a base near where I lived, so I picked him up at the airport and we decided to hang for the day. We hit up a GameWorks arcade, and after a few hours decided to head back to my car. I was parked in an underground parking garage, in the second underground floor. On the street level in the main lobby, there was an elevator to the lift, a bulletin board to the right, and stairs on the far left corner. A man and woman were reading something on the bulletin board. Being the lazy young men we were, we took the elevator. Step in, punch G2, and start talking about the games we just played, and watch the numbers change from 1 to G1 to G2. Step out the elevator, look around perplexed as we find ourselves on the ground floor. The couple in front of us, who were reading the bulletin board, turned around and gave us creepy stalker looks. We looked at each other and mouthed, "Did that just happen?" We head for the stairs and reach G2. And I turned to him and asked, "You felt the elevator move, right?" "Yep. Felt it move down and stop. The number changed to G2. "Yeah. Then what the hell just happened?" We've spoken to each other about this, and to this day we don't have an explanation. It's probably not the scariest thing you've ever heard, but to me, it always gives me chills. I'm completely certain I felt it move, and I vividly recall seeing the numbers change, so it had to have moved. I'd call myself insane if I'd have experienced this alone, but since I had a friend with me who also recalls the same details, I know it must have happened, and that something freaky was going on. This happened to me when I was around 10 years old. I was just a kid babysitting my 7-year-old sister. We grew up near an insane asylum, and every now and then we would get an escapee in our yard. They'd walk off the grounds and head through the woods towards the nearest big town. They'd get about a mile to our place and realize walking 40 miles to the town was probably not happening, so they'd ask to use our phone and get picked up by the hospital. This happened every now and then, but this wasn't the first time it happened when I was home without my folks. So picture this, me home alone with my sister. The woman who arrived in our driveway wanted me to call the hospital to pick her up, but she also asked me if I had some matches, presumably to light a cigarette. I ushered my sister into the house and locked the doors as I called. The woman was kind of half screaming, half moaning, "Matches! I need matches!" until they came and picked her up. I'm sure it was just for a cigarette, but it also could have been to burn us alive, so I didn't end up giving her any. I was home alone after dinner, with my girlfriend, and around 3 a.m., I hear a very loud bang. My dog and I get out of bed to scope it out, hoping to find the reason for the noise. We searched for 15 to 20 minutes but couldn't find anything. We go back to bed and not 10 minutes later, there's a bang again. This time I'm shaking. It sounded like it was coming from the same spot, and I spent the rest of the night awake not wishing to move. The next day, I found out that my girlfriend put 2 sparkling waters in the freezer to cool them down, forgot about them, and left the house and never told me about them. They exploded, and they kept me up all night. This happened to me a few years back, when I lived out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods and cornfields and whatnot. I was home alone late one night, and decided to step out on the porch for a late-night cigarette. I'm just there smoking away, and when I'm about halfway done, I take another deep drag, and when I blow out the smoke, it rolls around a face about a foot away from me. Needless to say, I tossed the cigarette away and noped back inside and locked the doors. It was about the closest I've come to a heart attack in my life. I had been watching a lot of really scary ghost stuff on TV when I was home alone, and went to bed thinking about it. Later that night I woke up in pitch darkness and heard a child singing or whistling in the room. I was frozen with cold sweats, ready to start crying. I remembered in the ghost stuff I watched, they talked to the ghost and made it better. I said, "Who are you?" all scary and shaky. My dog snorted and smacked her lips and went back to sleep. She had been snoring, and her damn nose was whistling. For the past week, I've been staying at my mum's while I transfer my belongings from my old apartment to my new one. As there are no Tim Hortons near her, I settled for McDonald's for my morning coffee needs. Each morning I've gone through the drive-thru, ordered a medium, paid and been on my way in under 2 minutes. Even with the usually quite crowded lines, this morning was different. When I arrived at my usual time, I found no one in the drive-thru. 2 brown garbage pails blocked both lanes, and there were almost no cars in the lot, except the 2 parked at the very back. Strange, but I've seen stranger. I parked and went in. The doors opened, but the restaurant was deserted, save for one old dude nursing a coffee and doing a puzzle in a paper. 2 young adults stood behind the counter as I approached, neither of them really moving or smiling or doing much of anything. "What can I get you?" one of them said, not even bothering with the usual pleasantries and smiles managers generally press service workers into saying. I ordered my coffee, put exact change on the counter, plus 20 cents, and the kid took it. Then I went to grab my coffee. The 2 kids working took ages to figure out the machine, and 5 minutes later, when I finally got my coffee, the order was wrong. It was black. I had requested cream and sweetener, but at that point I was getting a weird vibe and just wanted to leave. Curiosity, however, prompted me to ask, "Hey, so do you know why the drive-thru is closed?" He stared at me for a few seconds and then said, "Nope." There was still no one else in the restaurant in the few minutes I'd been there, and my desire to get the hell out of there was growing, so I hightailed it out of there. The creepiest thing that happened once I got back outside was the lot was full. Every single space had a car in it, but there was no one in the cars, and no one in the lot, and no one in the restaurant aside from the older guy with the newspaper. One car sat idling at the drive-thru window, with a guy who was staring straight ahead, and there was no one at the window at all. On the other side of the McDonald's is a bath fitter place and a funeral home, both of which were closed at 7:30 in the morning, and on the other side a bakery which was also closed. Residential houses surrounded the area. There is nowhere else so many people could have gone to in that hour for no reason and left their car at the parking lot. I got the absolute worst full-body shivers, got back into the car and took off really quick. I have no idea what that was about, what was going on, or if it was my coffee-deprived brain not making sense of everything. But it was genuinely an unsettling experience. I have witnessed quite a number of creepy things happening in my life, but I'm going to share one with you that happened when I was 11. My parents and sister went shopping, and I was staying home with my dog. I was sitting in my room reading a book, with my dog sleeping on the floor, when suddenly the dog woke up and started gnawing at something in the corner of the room. At that time, I was sharing the room with my younger sister. Her bed was located right next to that corner, and there were a lot of toys and teddy bears on her bed. Thus, at first, I thought the dog was barking at a teddy bear or something. I grabbed the biggest teddy and gave it to the dog to sniff, telling it to calm down. The dog wasn't interested in the teddy whatsoever. She kept looking at the corner, gnarling and barking. All her fur was ruffled. This was the moment I realized something strange was going down. The dog started approaching that corner and attempted it about 3 times, jumping away, screaming in pain each time she got near enough, as if something had hit her. I almost crapped myself, yet managed to stay calm somehow, and started talking in a raised voice. "Whatever you are, leave us alone. I don't want you to scare me anymore." Believe me or not, everything calmed down at that moment. The dog approached the corner again, and this time without screams of pain, and was sniffing it nervously for a while. Yet there were no traces of anything there. I told my parents about it right away when they came back. I was shaken and told them to never leave me alone there anymore. I've checked that room, but they told me the dog must have barked at these toys. I'm pretty sure there was something there. The dog was always very calm and never acted that way, yet this time I think she was able to see or at least sense something that I couldn't. The underlying sensation was it was something evil or malevolent. I don't know if it's possible to label that. I thought, because the dog acted that way, something must have been hurting her, or not letting her approach whatever it was. One of the first nights I was home alone with my brother. I was probably 13 or so. My parents were at a concert and left me in charge of my little brother. So after he goes to bed, there's a banging at the door. I'm terrified and sneak to the window. It was a neighbor from up the road. We weren't friends. He's never been to my house before, and I'm wondering why the hell he wants to come in. I stood on the other side of the door and said, "My parents aren't home. I can't open the door." I know it's stupid. Never let strangers know there are no adults around. And he just yells back, "It's getting dark. I just wanted to let you know your garage door is wide open." I felt like a schmuck, but I'm still alive. I was at home one night. My mom was asleep, so I was basically alone. I was only 8 and was taking the trash outside after the sun went down, when a hand reached from the side of our back deck and grabbed my leg, trying to yank me. I screamed very loud, and they let go. I ran inside. I grew up in a ranch-style home in SoCal. I was still living at home while going to college, partly because of cost, partly because my mum needed assistance with her health. My dad was often out of town on business, so it was up to me to hold down the fort. Around 2 a.m. I wake up, instantly on edge, with a sinking feeling that something is in the house. It was a full moon, and the Santa Ana winds were blowing exceptionally hard. I sat up and listened closely for over a minute, but could only hear the rustling of leaves outside. I couldn't hear anything inside, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I finally mustered the courage to get up and investigate. I quietly opened my bedroom door and crept down the hallway, navigating only by the available moonlight. As I reached the end of the hall, I could hear the front door was open and slowly banging against a metal umbrella stand when I was hit by the most putrid smell. At this point, the adrenaline had me close to puking. It took all of my strength to get around the corner to the door. I slam the door shut and start turning on every light I can find to begin looking around. My heart is pounding out of my chest as I go from room to room checking for an intruder. As I enter the dining room, I discover the source of the smell. Right in the middle of a rather expensive rug is what I later learned was a pile of partially digested figs. Turned out a coyote had gorged himself on dropped figs from our orchard and happened across the door opened by the wind. It entered the house and marked its newfound digs and likely fled when it heard me exit my bedroom. When I was going to college in Cooksville, Tennessee, I got to know some of the local kids, which actually meant kids from nearby rural areas and towns, with barely enough people to be considered population by any definition. Areas that you hear about, and still do, a double take at when hearing that it's an actual location or county, even when you've lived your entire life nearby. So of course, these kids knew every local ghost / creepy / urban legend, and they would mess around with us, and the stories would get passed down to children as sorts of tales. Then I had to go to the worst field trip in the middle of the night, because they wanted to prove a story. I just wanted to say that what they were speaking was absolute nonsense, and that their stories were lies. So here's a story. During the Civil War, in order to make money, and apparently live, a father ran a brothel while forcing his 5 or so daughters into prostitution. When one got pregnant, he would kill the baby on delivery and burn it to ash in a furnace. This went on for years until the locals found out and hung the man from a tree in his front yard, while the daughters committed suicide after being subjected to that for years. They were all apparently buried on the property behind the house where it happened. Now here's the messed up part. For whatever damn reason, the relatives who inherited the house never tore it down, sorted the land, and all of that stuff. The house, creepily enough, maintained itself according to locals. No one ever touched it, went in it, or went near it. When locals asked the relatives, they just said it was too evil to burn. So besides my brain going, "Did you try gasoline?" when I heard this part, I called bull. So no one wants anything to do with it. I get taken for a ride, a long, convoluted ride down the side and country roads where you are blessed if it has a street marker, and luckily if it's paved. All the way out to this house in the dead of night. At this point, I had seen some stuff from my first time in the woods. A little older, a little wiser, and I trusted my gut more. So when I say that on a bright, clear full moon night, that somehow this little house sucked the light out of the air, like someone had permanently cell-shaded this area to be shadowed, please believe me when I say that even 2 cars with brights on barely made a ripple in the darkness when we pointed the lights towards this place. Barely stepping out of the car onto the property was enough for me to get back into the car and not leave it again. The locals were spooked too, since apparently they had only heard how to get here. All I can remember was the house kind of flicked in the shadows, not like a light bulb, but kind of like a firefly, barely noticeable and easily missed, like breathing, except the shadows were expanding and contracting around it. Most of all, it felt wrong, like every cliché you've ever heard about supernatural stuff gone wild. It felt like it had a physical presence and was pissed at you specifically. Kind of like that feeling you get right before something bad happens on steroids. Everyone felt that. And after 5 or so minutes of just staring at it, we finally turned back to the dorms, and I go grab a sandwich. Before sharing my story with you, there are a few things you need to know to better understand it. First, I'm French, and this happened in the countryside where people don't necessarily lock their doors because they don't believe that anyone would come in without asking. So let me take you back to summer of 2019. I'm at a vacation property, a 2-story villa that is my mother's friend's. So, with him, my mother, some of her friends, I was staying in this house to rest before returning to work. After 5 days of being there, they decide to eat in a restaurant, but I opt to stay at home. They left, and I was downstairs eating my dinner and watching TV. I had at that moment a bad feeling, since I'd watched too many documentaries about sociopaths and stuff. I was thinking, something bad is going to happen. This house had what we call French doors, kind of big window doors that you can open. Anyway, after eating I decided to go upstairs and lock myself in my room. The bad feeling hasn't dissipated. But before that I went to check the door in front and behind the house. The problem is the door was open. As I said before, it was something normal here, so I didn't think it was a problem. The issue was that the door was unlocked. But like I said, this didn't really cross my mind to be an issue. I didn't think anyone would come in. Then I checked the windows. One was open, but I locked it, and I went back to my room. During the process, I could hear noises inside and outside the house, but since it could be auditory hallucinations, I had decided not to pay much attention to them. As I was locking up, I heard a few noises in and outside the house, but assumed they were just regular house noises and tried to put them out of my mind. After reaching my room, I called a friend of mine to have someone to talk to, and after an hour, she couldn't hear me anymore, as if the network had gone, which was strange because I'd never had a problem like this, so I began to panic, because I had no one with me, nor my phone or laptop were working, and weird noises could still be heard. About 10 minutes later, I heard some people downstairs and my mother yelling my name, so I went down to see them, but I was really shocked. Why? I was the only one to have the door key, so how did they enter? 10 minutes later I heard people speaking downstairs, so I came down and was speaking to my mum. I asked her how she got in, and she said that they managed to get in because I left the pool window open, when I was very sure I'd closed it. My mother thinks I was just paranoid, but I am convinced that someone made their way in and had a sneak around the house. I don't think anything was taken, but all those noises I were hearing and the fact that window was left open, to me confirms that something strange was happening that night. Before this story begins, I would just like to say that this story in particular isn't particularly horrifying or disturbing, but it would definitely make you angry, and I think that you'll enjoy it. I was riding home with my bike alone, because my little sister was at the dentist with my mum, and my dad was at work. I live in this really small town, so never suspected anything like this would happen. I'm going to open my garage door because I only have the front door key. I rush to open my garage door, but I have to pee. So I go in, do my pee, and come back out to grab my bike. The moment I see it, I see a woman holding my bike and walking away with it like an 8-year-old. So I walk up to her and say, "Ma'am, please give me my bike back." And she goes, "Excuse me, young man, but this is our bike." I reply with, "How old's your kid?" "Why should I tell you?" I reply with, "Oh, I wanted to get this bike, I liked it, and sorry for trying to steal it." And she actually goes, "His name's Matt, he's 8. "Ma'am, this bike is for 10-year-olds. I have to get my bike back or I'm going to call the cops." At this point she was shouting, "How dare you threaten me? This is our bike and you have no proof it's yours." I reply with a mild tone, "Ma'am, give me back my bike before I call the cops." And I do indeed have proof. And this woman starts screaming. And she says that she's going to call the police. And I start to fume. I tell her that I'm calling the cops on her for stealing my bike, and then say hello to jail. At this point, one of my friends are on his way home and sees me shouting at the lady. He also rides to school, and has rode with me a few times, so he knows very well it's my bike. Then he asks what's going on, and I explain. And he whips to me, "Call the cops, I'll distract her." So I walk into my home and call the police on my family phone, while calling my mum on my original. My mum doesn't pick up, and I think, screw it. The police answer, and I explain that there's a woman outside trying to steal my bike. She asks where I live, I tell her, and boom. Now she tells me the police will be there in about 10 minutes. I say thank you and hang up. I go outside and see this woman shouting at my friend, and my man is still speaking calmly to her. I see the kid cry out, "Mummy, I want the bike." And perfect timing, amidst the chaos, the police arrive, and this woman has the nerves to say, "Thank God, the boys are trying to steal my son's new bike." The police says, "Do you have any proof, ma'am?" And she says, "Yes," and pulls out a receipt of some groceries with a bike bottle holder for her kid's real bike. Now this is where she messes up. I tell the officer I have the receipt for the full bike, head inside, grab a box, dig in it for 5 minutes, and ta-da, there it is. I rush out with it and show it to the officer. The officer says, "Ma'am, you screwed up on the first part. If you bought it an hour ago, excuse me, where are you heading? Home? Thought so. If you bought it about an hour ago and you're heading home right now, you wouldn't been able to have placed it on the bike yet." And boom, she's in cuffs. The officer asks me if my parents are home and I say no. He tells me to call them and I do. My dad comes home in half an hour, but my mum wasn't coming home for at least another hour. When my dad arrives, he spoke with the officer, and a week later we get the message the woman has been put in jail for 2 months and has community service for 5 weeks. She also had been found guilty of stealing candy for her sweet little baby and for assault. Apparently she slapped a kid's mum who wouldn't share their candy. Holy hell. That's the end of the story. My dad let me choose to press charges or not because I was the victim, not him. I have anger management issues, so I immediately said yes. I haven't been that boiling for months. Moral of the story, don't steal stuff or do other illegal things, guys. This was last June before I turned 18. Me and some friends went on a surfing holiday to an English town in Cornwall. We decided to visit a place called the Eden Project, which was a massive indoor rainforest, but it was quite far away. We got a bus which dropped us off about 5 miles away and planned to walk the rest of the way. We ended up getting very lost, and to make matters worse, it started pouring very heavy rain, and we were stuck in the middle of the English countryside. We decided to see if anyone on the road would give us a lift, so we did the usual stick out your thumb hitchhiker thing. A few cars went by, until a truck stopped. It was 2 very big grown men that looked like a good few years older than us. We felt a little uneasy when we saw, since we were 4 young-looking girls, but I went up to the window to speak to them anyway. The guys looked up and down at us in a very creepy fashion, and I asked if they were going to the Eden Project. They said they were going wherever we were, and that we should all get in their truck. At this point I was slightly freaked out, then noticed the open beer cans sitting in the cup holders. I politely said no thank you, and they should carry on, and we would find a different car. The driver hesitated, and looked me up and down again before speeding off. I was a little freaked out after that, but we ended up getting a lift off some nice elderly Americans in a minivan, so it turned out alright in the end. I'm glad none of us got in the truck with them though. They were giving us seriously creepy vibes, and in all fairness, you should never drink and drive. This happened around 2009 to 2010, in the Thumb region of Michigan. One of my good friends bought a huge Italianate farmhouse in 1876. Well, naturally, we explored the house. It sat empty for a long time. We found a dried-up cistern under the floor, but it was filled with children's shoes. That was creepy, but whatever. When we started to demo, that is when things began to happen. Nothing crazy, but the lights would turn on even though we knew for a fact we turned them off, and the doors would slam. My friend put some crosses up in the house, and whatever was in that house did not like them. They would get knocked off the walls almost every night, and we began to hear footsteps. The final straw was when this thing started growling into my buddy's ear when he was sleeping. He left the house right there and then. I've never seen him scared before, as he's a bigger guy and not easily frightened. My friend ended up moving out completely that day and listed the house.